All right, looks like we're ready to call this meeting to order. This is our special meeting for Wednesday, May 21st, 2025.
And Meredith, before we get started, we have Michael joining us by Zoom, so we need to take a vote on that. Somebody has to.
Should we do that prior to the roll call?
Yes, ma'am. So then we can include him as the roll.
Sounds good. So would someone like to make a motion to?
I can move to include him in today's meeting virtually.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. So move to roll call.
Things are on here. Okay, so roll call. Commissioner Freitas?
Here.
Commissioner Meyer?
Here.
Commissioner Lazar?
Here.
Commissioner Kraft?
Here.
And Commissioner Benson.
Here.
Thank you.
Commissioner Freitas will lead us in a salute to the flag. We will move to approval of minutes for the April 23rd, 2025 meeting.
I read them and they look good to me, so I'll move approval. I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. All right. We are going to start with new business. Resolution to remove the parking indentures between 311 G Street and the properties at 3005 G and 611 Harris.
Hi, I'd like to just take a moment to introduce you to one of our newest assistant planners, Samuel Grifford, who will be presenting to you tonight on this item.
Hello. All right. All right. Hello, members of the Planning Commission. I'm Samuel Grifford, Assistant Planner with the city, and so I'm here to present a resolution to remove parking indentures between 3011 G Street and the properties at 3005 G Street and 611 Harris Street. Is it? Oh, okay. So for some background on the situation, the subject properties are all owned by Gay Taroni. 3011 G Street is a residence with a rear alley parking area, and 3005 G Street and 611 Harris Street are both offices. In 2009, 7 parking spaces in the rear parking lot of 3011 G Street were indentured for the other 2 properties to provide parking as required by the City of Eureka Municipal Code at the time. In March of 2025, the owner applied to demolish and rebuild the existing garage at the rear of 3011 G Street, which would expand the footprint of the garage and remove 2 of the 7 indentured spaces. The indentures prohibit any other use of the spaces unless removed, and per the language of the indentures, they can only be removed by resolution of the Planning Commission, which will then be approved by City Council. So staff have determined the only way to build this new garage is to remove the indentures. The indentures, wait, hold on. Sorry, we went a bit far there. The indentures state that they can be removed when the parking is no longer required by Eureka Municipal Code. California Government Code, section 65863.2, prohibits mandatory parking minimums within 1/2 mile of a major transit stop. In 2022, the Humboldt County Association of Governments identified a major transit stop at the Harrison F. Street bus stop, which is about 0.06 miles from the parcels. As the state law has rendered parking minimums at these parcels unenforceable and state law supersedes our zoning code, staff believe this supports the removal of the parking indentures so that the garage at 3011 G Street can be built. So I have this map here. It's the half-mile radius around that nearest stop. So there's the Harrison F stop, and then here's our subject parcels. So they're well within that radius. So our recommendation is for the Planning Commission to adopt a resolution approving the removal of parking indentures involving 3011 G Street, 3005 G Street, and 611 Harris Street as the existing uses comply with current parking regulations. I have a suggested motion on the next slide, but we'll stop to answer any questions the commission may have.
Thank you and welcome. Questions for staff? This isn't listed under public hearings. We open a public comment. Okay, thank you for clarifying. Okay, would you want to pull that recommendation back up?
Yeah.
Would someone like to make a motion?
Sure. I'll move that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution approving the removal of the parking indentures between 3011 G Street and the properties at 3005 G Street and 611 Harris Street.
I can second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay, we will open up a public hearing for F1, the McKinney Residential Unit Use Permit.
Again, I'd like to introduce you to another new assistant planner, Henry Baker, and he will be presenting to you tonight.
And thank you, Caitlin. And good evening, commissioners. I'm Assistant Planner Henry Baker, and I'll be presenting the McKinney Residential Unit Use Permit for 2328 23rd Street for your consideration and approval. Here's a bird's eye view of the project location. The property is located in the inland portion of the city, near the intersection of Boone Street and Harrison Avenue near St. Joseph's Hospital. Zooming in further, we can see the zoning districts within the area. The property is located within the Hospital Medical District and borders residential low and public facilities districts. The property is a 0.27 acre interior flag lot located on the south side of 23rd Street and is outlined here in yellow. 23rd Street dead ends approximately 150 feet west of the property at a gulch greenway associated with Second Gulch. The site includes one structure currently under construction, outlined here in blue. The applicant intends to use the front 1,930 square feet for medical offices and a rear 458 square foot space as a residence, outlined here in red. Current uses in the neighborhood consist of residences to the south and medical offices to the east and west, and the Sheriff's Woodlot and Eureka Dog Park are located to the north. Here's the floor plan provided by the applicant showing the residential unit. The residence, again outlined in red, has all the amenities of a one-bedroom, one-bathroom apartment, including utilities, living space, a kitchen, and a stacking washer-dryer. The applicant's intent is to rent living space to medical professionals in the area and establish an overnight presence on 23rd Street. Staff has reviewed the relevant regulations and required permits for the project and found residential uses are conditionally permitted within the Hospital Medical District. Therefore, a conditional use permit is required. The site is exempt from design standards because the medical offices are excluded. The site is also exempt from design review because the site does not have a street-facing facade, and the project is categorically exempt from CEQA under a Class 32 infill development projects exemption. To approve the conditional use, there are 5 required findings for approval that 1. The proposed use is consistent with the general plan, zoning code, and any applicable specific plan or area plan adopted by City Council. The site is suitable for the size, design, and operating characteristics of the proposed use. 3. The proposed use will be compatible with existing and planned uses in the vicinity of the property. The proposed use will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, and welfare. And 5, the proposed use is properly located within the city and adequately served by existing and planned services and infrastructure. Staff believes all the required findings to approve the conditional use can be made and are included in the staff report. And for these reasons, the recommendation is to hold a public hearing and adopt a resolution finding the project is exempt from CEQA and conditionally approving the application. I have a suggested motion when you're ready, but we'll stop sharing until then. And the applicant and I are here to answer any questions.
Thank you. And welcome as well. I'll open it up for questions for staff.
Just want to confirm, I think in the staff report, the building's under construction currently for the entirety, but it would be basically built out for the residential unit if this were approved.
That is correct.
Okay.
Commissioner Benson, you have any questions?
I do not.
All right. We'll open it up for public comment. There is a lot of you here tonight. Thank you for being here. We appreciate you guys being part of the process. Just as a reminder, we do appreciate if you state your name and city of residence, as well as a reminder that you have 3 minutes during your public comment, and there's a timer on the wall. It'll give you a little beep when you're getting down to the end, and so we appreciate your attention to that. If you are wanting to speak on the McKinney residential unit use permit, now would be your time. Okay, looks like we're clear on Zoom as well.
Nobody up for Zoom.
If anybody on Zoom wanted to participate in this public hearing, you would raise your hand on Zoom. Not seeing anybody.
All right, we'll bring it back to the commission for a motion and discussion. Would you bring the suggested motion back up on screen?
I can make it, and if we have discussion about it, I guess we can make it after I make it. I move the Planning Commission adopt a resolution finding the project is exempt from CEQA and conditionally approving the McKinney residential unit use permit at 2328 23rd Street.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. All right, moving along to F2, Sunset Heights, Parcel 1 Design Review Modification.
I think Alex has already presented to you before, but Assistant Planner Alex Gonzalez is going to present to you tonight.
Sweet, thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Assistant Planner Gonzalez, and I'll be presenting on a proposed modification to an approved design of the street-facing facades of Building 1A and 1B on Parcel 1 of 2 for the Sunset Heights multifamily affordable housing development at 1200 West Harris Street. So here is a bird's eye view of the project location. The project location is located in the southwest portion of the city near Bayshore Mall. Looking closer, the project site is made up of 2 parcels, of which new APNs are still pending. It is located between West Harris and West Henderson Streets, upslope of Broadway and west of Fairfield. The proposed modification is only for the 2 buildings proposed on Parcel 1, which include 44 dwelling units. Proposed modifications include an expansion of the building footprint, as well as a change in the placement of recessed projecting bay walls, exterior wall materials, and roof lines for more solar panels. And I will be showing those changes in the upcoming slides. There's no changes to the number of units or the previously included amenities like open plazas, laundry facilities, or the community center that was previously proposed. Only the street-facing facades are required to undergo design review approval. So for this modification, the only street-facing facades on Parcel 1 are along Broadway and along West Harris Street. Project overview. We just went over that. The project received design review approval for the Planning Commission in December of 2024, and under Eureka Municipal Code Section 155.420.080, the project that undergoes a major change after receiving approval must return to the original review authority for approval for the proposed changes, which is why Planning Commission is conducting the review instead of Design Review Committee. And in this case, the proposed modification qualifies as a major change because there is an expansion in the size of the structure beyond what was originally approved. So here's the originally approved site plan. Although design review is only concerned with street-facing building facades, I would like to show the change in footprint to ensure that you're aware of that. And circled in pink are the two buildings that are being modified. So here's a proposed site plan. The building footprint of building 1A closest to Harris and outlined in blue is increasing from 34,500 square feet to 37,950 square feet. And the building footprint of 1B outlined in yellow increased from 6,100 square feet to 7,985 square feet. This increase in footprint did not impact the project's consistency with setbacks. So now on to architectural changes. Here's a comparison of the proposed and original western-facing facade of Building 1A, which faces Broadway, and it's the closest building to Harris Street. The top image is a proposed facade, and the bottom image is the originally approved facade, and the applicant proposes to increase the use of board and batten and stucco on projecting bay walls, where previously that material was mostly used only on the recessed walls, as shown in red. They're also planning to shift the hip bays to one side and widen the flat roof bays, as outlined in pink, where previously there were narrow hip roof bays with flat roof bays along the sides of them. So building 1B, which is the smaller building in the middle of the project site, this is the western-facing facade facing Broadway. So for this western-facing facade, they're going to be changing the roof line from they're proposing to do a 2-level step roof line where previously there was a 3-level step roof line, as outlined in red. And lastly, for the southern-facing facade of Building 1A facing Harris Street, the applicant proposes to remove the use of cement plaster and replace it with vertical board and batten, as pointed out in orange, where previously cement plaster was on the outer edges, as pointed out by this red arrow. They also propose to add flat and shed-like roof lines to the center of the building, where previously there were hip bays with flat roof bays on either side. So to approve a design review modification, the Planning Commission must find that the proposed development will not be detrimental to public health, safety, or welfare, or materially injurious to the properties or improvements in the vicinity, as well as the proposed project complies with all 7 design review criteria in Eureka Municipal Code Section 155.412.040J, which is a design review criteria. So our recommendation, based on the information presented tonight and the analysis in the staff report, the findings can be made to support the proposed modification to the approved design of the street-facing facades of Building 1A and 1B. Therefore, our recommendation is to hold a public hearing and adopt a resolution finding the project modification exempt from CEQA and approving with conditions. And we have a suggested motion, but we'll wait for discussion and questions.
I also just wanted to add that the developer heard the concern about access from this property to nearby goods and services and bus stops. And so they've decided to apply for an affordable housing and sustainable communities grant with the state, which not only pays for the housing, but also pays for a bunch of public improvements. And so we have a bunch of proposed public improvements along Harris and Henderson to go along with this grant. And to make the project more competitive for the grant, it's going to be a large family. That's the category they're applying in. So that's hence like larger unit sizes and the larger footprint.
Thank you for the extra details. Questions for staff?
I'll start. So in addition to being more competitive for the grant you just mentioned, what is the applicant gaining from these changes?
They're also changing the roof lines to be more flat. Previously, there were more angled roof lines, so they're increasing the area for solar panels. I
think the biggest part is to make it feasible for those large families, and then adding more roof line for the solar.
The rural communities, Beth is here if you would like to ask the applicant.
Yeah, it's a curiosity question, to be honest, but the increases in footprint are significant. So I was wondering if there was more units or bigger units or how that would work. So if the applicant can answer that, I'd love to hear it.
Good evening, I'm Beth Matsumoto. Thanks. Good evening, I'm Beth Matsumoto. I'm the Director of Multifamily Development with Rural Communities Housing. We changed the unit sizes to be 3 bedrooms because there's an incentive through the ASIC program for the 3-bedroom units. There's also a need for large family, low-income housing in that neighborhood. So it was incentivized, and it was also to meet a need.
Thank you. That sounds good.
I'll just check in with you, Commissioner Benson, if you have any questions.
I actually have to recuse myself from this altogether.
Oh, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, we will open it to public comment, and you're welcome to be first if you'd like, if you have something you'd like to say.
One moment. Commissioner Benson, can you please inform or state what your conflict is, why you're recusing yourself, for the record?
Gold Rush Coffee and Green Rush Cannabis Co. Within 500 feet of this building.
Thank you.
Does Commissioner Benson need to turn off his camera?
No.
But Commissioner Benson, I just recommend you turn off your camera just so that you don't make any faces that could be perceived.
Okay.
I would just say that we're grateful for the opportunity to partner with the city on the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities grant program. It will bring in much needed safety improvements for Harris, as well as transportation improvements. City staff and Humboldt Transit Authority, as well as other community partners, have been working really hard to put in this grant. So we just want to say thank you very much. And I guess that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Do you want the suggested motion?
Yeah, you could put it up. It looks like we're clear in the room here, and I don't see any hands raised on Zoom, but if anyone would like to make comment here on Zoom, please do.
Evelyn Doyle doesn't know how to raise her hand, so that's
Okay, go ahead and you can unmute yourself and
Hello there. I'm thinking you're directing that to me. My name is Evelyn Doyle, and I cannot start my video because it's disabled by the host. Okay, so we'll just speak. I am wondering, having just dealt with a flat roof and the problem with the rain, why they're going back to a flat roof, because I was told if I had more of a slanted roof, I would do better for solar panels. So that's always a curiosity to me, having come from an area where we had pitched roofs, that they do a lot of flat roofs here in Eureka, and was curious to find out why that is.
Thank you. This isn't a question and answer, just to clarify. So this is just a public comment, but you're welcome to reach out to the applicant to get more information, Evelyn, if you'd like. All right, we'll bring it back to commissioners for a suggested motion and any further discussion.
I'd be happy to make a motion if we could bring that up. So I'll move that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution finding the project modification exempt from CEQA and conditionally approving the revised street-facing facade designs for buildings 1A and 1B on parcel 1 of the Sunset Heights Affordable Housing Development.
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
I think this is a great project, and I don't have any real reservations about the design changes, so I'm happy to support it. Glad to see it going forward.
Yeah, I agree. And the city of Arcata received ASIC funding for a project in the last 5 years, 10 years, and it brought some great sidewalk and bus improvements. So I hope you get the grant.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. All right, we are moving to F3, Gulch and Greenway Overlay Zone and associated municipal code updates. I have to recuse myself as I live in the overlay zone, but I am going to join the audience as a member of the public and reserve my right to make comment if needed.
Good evening, commissioners. I'm Kristen Kenyon. For those who don't know me, I'm the Director of Development Services here. I'm going to be doing this presentation. So, Gulch or Greenway, they're vegetated areas that are within or adjacent to valleys and ravines, and they contain wetlands and watercourses that eventually flow to Humboldt Bay. If you look at an aerial image of the city, they're the green fingers that are cutting across and disrupting our street grid. This map shows the city boundary in a black dotted line and the coastal zone in light blue. This planning effort is focused on the portion of the Gulch Greenways that are located outside or inland of the coastal zone boundary within the incorporated city of Eureka. These include Cooper Gulch and Second or McFarland Gulch, and then also this area down here that we call the Gulches of Martin Slough that flow into Martin Slough, Elk River, and Humboldt Bay. Oh, I didn't realize this slide was here. For some background context, the unincorporated county already has a similar ordinance called a streamside management ordinance. And because the city boundary is pretty confusing in some areas, some people don't realize where the city ends and the county begins. But outside of the incorporated city in the county, there's already this streamside management ordinance that sets a buffer from perennial streams and wetlands of 100 feet and intermittent streams and wetlands of 50 feet. And it requires a special permit in that zone. And it only allows certain uses, not any new residential development. And it has a number of exemptions, including for routine maintenance activities, which are defined by the county as removal of less than 6,000 square feet of vegetation with trees less than 12 inches in diameter and less than 2,000 square feet of exposed soil. This is not the ordinance that's being proposed tonight. This is the ordinance that's in the unincorporated county, but I just wanted to give that context. And then also you'll have that as comparison when you hear about the proposed ordinance. So why are we doing this? Which is a question I've gotten a lot. It's to implement a number of general plan policies that we have, specifically NR 2.2, which calls for us to adopt Gulch Greenway preservation and management guidelines that identify and protect sensitive species habitat and the hydraulic capacity of Eureka's gulches and greenways. This was actually a policy that was in our 1997 general plan as well. And when we went to adopt our 2040 general plan in 2018, we also adopted an environmental impact report that found no significant impact of the planned growth of the city through 2040 on wildlife movement, riparian habitat, sensitive species, and biological resources. And it cited NR 2.2 and other policies as basically mitigation for that, to make that determination that it wouldn't be a significant impact. Also, more recently, and the immediate reason that this is being prioritized is because City Council, in their 2023-2024 strategic vision, set adopting a Gulch Greenway ordinance as a 2-year goal. So why adopt local standards? This map shows that the majority of the land in the city's gulches and greenways is zoned residential, and most of that is single-family residential, or R1. And in residential districts, here's the pie chart showing that in terms of land area, it's 60% residential and about 38% public. So in residential zoning, development is allowed by right with a building permit if it's consistent with objective code standards, and the current inland zoning code includes no standards that afford special protections to wetland streams and riparian habitat, and no standards that limit development on steep slopes. There is no discretionary review and therefore no CEQA environmental review, and without environmental standards in our code or discretionary review, the city has no regulatory tools to prevent further fragmentation of the Gulch Greenways. So in 2022, the city began the process of preparing a Gulch Greenway ordinance, and the city conducted a virtual public workshop and completed a public survey that year, and then published a draft ordinance and mapping methodology that was reviewed by the Open Space, Parks and Rec Commission and the Planning Commission. At that point, so 554 people took that 2022 survey, and because we mailed notice of the survey to Gulch Greenway property owners, 41% of the respondents ended up reporting that they were people who lived and or owned property on a Gulch Greenway within city limits. The survey included a list of benefits provided by the city's Gulch Greenways, and people were asked to select the benefits they found the most valuable. The most valued benefit cited was fish and wildlife habitat and passage value, both for all respondents and for those who reported living on the gulches and greenways, which is also something that we've heard since then. People like to tell stories about what animals they've seen on the gulches and greenways. So the other, we also asked, what do you find most concerning? And there was a list of different things, and concerns about fragmentation and loss of the Gulch Greenways due to encroachment from development was the second most popular choice. As you can see, illegal dumpings and encampments was the most popular, and then crime and public safety was the third, and those can't really be effectively addressed through development regulations and need to be addressed through other means. The 2022 draft ordinance did not allow for any new residential development in the Gulch Greenway management area. And when we were doing the mapping and analysis of it, we realized that 65 of the parcels in that mapped area were parcels that were identified in our housing element as being available and ripe for housing development to meet our regional housing needs allocation. So this caused us to pause and rethink the ordinance to ensure it doesn't reduce residential capacity inconsistent with state law. The effort began again when City Council adopted this, wanting us to complete the ordinance as part of their strategic vision, as I mentioned before. And then we hired a consultant, Ben Noble, to help us draft the ordinance. And we held a special study session with council in October of 2024 to get new direction on the mapping and the language in the ordinance. And a revised ordinance was published in March of this year, and we mailed notice to implicated property owners and emailed our Gulch Greenway mailing list. And then we had, we presented the draft ordinance at the Open Space Parks and Rec Commission in March. And now it's coming to Planning Commission. So what we discussed with council back when we were reimagining the ordinance was just how difficult it is to accurately map the gulches and greenways at a citywide scale. And in particular, site-specific stream and wetland investigation at this level is just infeasible. So instead, the approach was to create an overlay zone that applies to parcels that's used as a screening tool, triggering site-specific evaluation when development is proposed. So we hired a GIS consultant who mapped 20% slopes, areas below the break-in slope, and a uniform 100-foot buffer upslope of the break-in slope. And any parcels that's showing the 100-foot buffer, any parcels that intersected with this mapping were included in the overlay. While the mapping overlay applies to parcels, the ordinance includes a textual definition of the Gulch Greenway Management Area, or GGMA, which is a subset of the overlay where additional permitting requirements apply. The Gulch Greenway Management Area is defined as places that have slopes of 20% or greater, wetlands, stream channel and 500-year floodplain, and riparian habitat to the edge of the riparian drip line, and a buffer of 100 feet from wetlands and 50 feet beyond the edge of the riparian drip line or break-in slope, whichever is greater. So in this picture, you can see the break-in slope, and there would be a 50-foot buffer beyond that to create the Gulch Greenway Management Area. There's one big caveat in this definition. The GGMA does not include an improved outdoor area or the footprint of a legally established structure. So while the GGMA definition includes a 50-foot buffer from beyond the break-in slope, what we see a lot of in the city is parcels that have been developed right up to the break-in slope. In this case, there would be no 50-foot buffer. The improved yard area would not be included in the GGMA. All right, so for different types of development, and whether you're in or outside of that defined GGMA area, there's different permitting requirements outlined by the proposed ordinance that go from no permit to zoning clearance, which is a staff level review as part of the building permit, no extra time or cost, or grading permit, unless no building or grading permit would be required, and then they would have to pay a small fee for the zoning clearance. But it's administrative, and you're just looking at whether it's consistent with objective standards, and if so, you approve it. Whereas the minor and conditional Gulch Greenway permits, they're discretionary permits that involve public noticing and a hearing for the conditional one and a hearing if requested for the minor one. So outside of the GGMA area, most things would be permitted by right or would require a zoning clearance, which would be referred to California Department of Fish and Wildlife for comment. And those areas would also have to follow the overlay standards. Within the GGMA, different types of development need either a zoning clearance, a minor or conditional Gulch Greenway permit. There are a few things that would be also permitted by right, like invasive species removal, CDFW referral, and follow the overlay zoning standards. And because a minor or conditional Gulch Greenway permit is a discretionary permit, that would trigger CEQA as well. So the proposed findings for the Gulch Greenway permit are that the project complies with the standards, it minimizes and mitigates impacts to fish and wildlife habitat and movement corridor values to the extent feasible, minimizes risk of damage to development both on and outside the subject property from erosion, flooding, and fire hazards, and protects the water quality and hydrology of Humboldt Bay and its tributaries. So in addition to setting up definitions and permitting processes and requirements, the overlay regulations, like I mentioned, they include standards that mostly just reference other parts of our code where the standards already exist. And then in adding the Gulch Greenway overlay zone, we were reviewing other sections of our code and propose updates to those as well to align with the new ordinance, and also just because there were some things that needed to get cleaned up. So the building code includes this site erosion control section of the building code is basically our grading regulations. And when you need a grading permit, which is also called an erosion control permit. And what it does is it changes the exemption from square footage to cubic yardage, and various other things that are described in your staff report. Tree removal, I'm going to talk about in more detail in a second. Landscaping, the changes are, right now, our code only prohibits planting invasive species. That only applies to required landscaping. And so we're modifying it so it applies to all planted stuff in the city, regardless of whether it was required landscaping or not. Expanding the definition of invasive species to include identification by Humboldt County Weed Management Area, and updating our water efficiency landscaping trigger to align with state law. And then there's various just areas of the code where the overlay, GGMA, and Gulch Greenway permits are referenced that we added. So our current tree removal regulations in our zoning code defines protected trees by listing 23 species of trees, and they must be 24 inches in diameter or larger to be protected. And a tree permit is currently required to remove 5 or fewer protected trees. And a conditional use permit is currently required to remove over 5 trees in 10 years or for commercial timber harvest. And we found that the conditional use permit findings, which you saw earlier in this meeting, are better for when you're proposing a use of a building, and they don't really apply very well to tree removal. There's currently exemptions from these requirements for a tree removal permit or a conditional use permit. Any number of trees can be removed by right if they're within 15 feet of the footprint of a proposed structure or within the boundary of an associated access road with a zoning clearance under an approved building permit. So right now, if somebody comes in to a vacant lot and they want to construct a home, they can remove any number of trees needed to construct that home in their access road, and they just need a zoning clearance. And it doesn't count towards their 5 trees for the tree permit or anything like that. There's no review of it. Also, any number of trees can be removed by right now if an arborist or a registered professional forester says they are hazardous or hinder sunlight to solar energy systems with a zoning clearance. Under the proposed amendments to the tree removal regulations, we'd be going from a list of tree species to any tree native to coastal Northern California. Outside the GGMA, the 24-inch diameter would stay the same. Inside, we're proposing a 12-inch diameter consistent with the county's streamside management ordinance. Outside the GGMA, permitting would be the same as before, except we wouldn't be doing conditional use permits anymore. It would be a discretionary tree removal permit with its own unique findings. And then inside the GGMA, now you would need a discretionary Gulch Greenway permit approval unless you're for a lot of vegetation removal inside the GGMA, unless there was hazardous trees or non-native vegetation removal without herbicide or wheeled mechanized equipment within the Gulch Greenway management area. And there's a nesting bird survey provision, which is not new. That's in that tree removal section. So the adoption process tonight, if Planning Commission moves forward to make a recommendation to council, then council, we would be noticing the council meeting public hearing basically tomorrow. We'd be sending out notice for them to vote on introducing the ordinance on June 17th. And then if they do in fact do that and introduce the ordinance, then we would tentatively be scheduling the vote on adoption for July 15th, because the July 1st City Council meeting is likely going to be canceled. The notice of the Planning Commission hearing was published in the Times Standard and on the city website and bulletin board. It was sent to the Gulch Greenway email list. And although this is not required, we heard from people that they really wanted to be noticed. So we mailed postcards to property owners of APNs in the Gulch Greenway overlay zone, even though it was over 1,000 mailers. And we intend to do the same for the city council hearing. So CEQA, this is a discretionary action, so it triggers CEQA, the adoption of new regulations. However, there's a categorical exemption in CEQA for actions by regulatory agencies for protection of natural resources and the environment, provided that there's no construction activities involved and no relaxation of standards allowing environmental degradation. We also believe it qualifies for a common sense exemption. Here's a motion if the Planning Commission would like to approve the recommendation. If Planning Commission would like to recommend City Council adopt the ordinance and associated municipal code updates, I'm recommending some minor modifications to what was included in your agenda packet. There's incorrect reference to the Gulch Greenway ordinance in the tree removal modifications. And then also, we received a lot of feedback about concerns about people disposing of material in the Gulch Greenways. It's already not allowed by 94.15 of the municipal code, but we would recommend adding a standard to the Gulch Greenway standards that just references that section and makes it clear that green waste would also count as rubbish. So I'll stop sharing.
So I suspect several of us will have questions. I'll start. I could.
Sure. I sorry to interrupt, but I meant to disclose ex parte before we got going. I want to do it as soon as I can. I was contacted by a member of the public, Mr. Kelly Martin, and he had questions about the ordinance and has property on O Street, and I encouraged him to attend tonight's meeting, and that was pretty much the thrust of our conversation. So I just wanted to get that on the record.
Actually, I should do the same. I was also contacted by Kelly, who is sitting in the back there, and both said that Commissioner Lazar is smarter than I am, and that he should come to tonight's meeting. So I could use, I think probably a lot of us could use guidance from staff, council, and probably you, Director Kenyon. Talk to us about specifically the Planning Commission's role in this. You know, this is as the actions before us, before this item or tonight, you know, something comes up, we apply code, we listen to staff, take input from the public, and make a decision or recommendation. How similar is that to this? I mean, I would just confess that as a planning commissioner, I probably would act differently and think differently and ask different questions than if I was on city council. And so talk about that both for my help, but also for everybody in the room.
Sure. So whenever there's a proposed amendment to the zoning map or zoning code, which is what we have here, that's a legislative change. And so it's up to city council to make the decision on that. Planning commission really just makes decisions on quasi-judicial hearings where you're applying existing rules to a specific case. This is crafting new rules, so it's council's decision. The planning commission, though, in your capacity as experts on the general plan and zoning code, you're here to make a recommendation to council. And so you have the options to recommend that they adopt it or adopt it with modifications or deny it. And regardless of what recommendation you make, it will bring it to council for their decision and will report on what your recommendation was. And then in our zoning code, there's findings for approval of zoning and map amendments, which I should have put in the presentation. The proposed amendment is consistent with the general plan and any applicable specific plan or area plan, of which there are none for this area of the city. The one specific plan we have is in the coastal zone. The proposed amendment is internally consistent with other provisions of the zoning code, and the proposed amendment will not be detrimental to the public interest, health, safety, convenience, or welfare. And for map amendments, the affected site is physically suitable in terms of design, location, shape, size, and other characteristics to accommodate development that complies with the zoning code and general plan and contributes to the health, safety, and welfare of the properties, surrounding properties, and the community at large. So this is why the staff report tonight was 20 pages long, is because we spent a lot of time making those findings in writing for you.
Thank you. And
one moment, I have something to add to
oh,
that.
Please.
So, yeah, you have 4 options in front of you, and Director Kenyon mentioned 3 of them, and I want to mention the 4th, which is not being recommended to you tonight. But that's approve, conditionally approve, deny, or continue the item for additional study. We've been presented a timeline, and that's not being recommended to you, but just for the record, your bylaws will give you those 4 options.
Okay, thank you for that.
I would, though, read from the approval section. It says that if the Planning Commission takes no action within 60 days after the date the hearing was closed to the public, the City Council will consider the proposed amendment without a Planning Commission recommendation.
Okay. And so we had both in a letter received and Mr. Martin's concern were about residential properties not developed yet in an overlay zone. In the case of the letter, sounds like they were either through or pretty far in the permitting process. In the case of Mr. Martin's property, he's not that far in. What are, for people in those situations, that kind of continuum, what does the process look like for them? Does somebody who's permitted already, is that grandfathered or something like that, or do they have additional work that they would need to do through to somebody who says, I want to develop this property a year from now?
Right. So anything in section 155.104.100 of our zoning code, it says if the city deems an application complete but does not take final action on the application before the effective date of the zoning code update, the application remains subject to the zoning code in effect when the application was deemed complete. So if you have a complete application in the door already for instance, a residence, then that residence is subject to the current zoning code and wouldn't be subject to, if this gets adopted, the zoning code in August. But that would just be for that development. Going forward, if they proposed another residence, that new residence they would be getting that complete building permit in after the ordinance is adopted, and that residence would be subject to the additional permitting requirements of the ordinance if it were adopted.
Okay, I appreciate that. Questions from other commissioners?
I just wanted to ask, you did a good job of talking about the public process, but I just wanted to So there was a workshop prior to the launch of the newer iteration of the regulations that was at the council. But as far as meetings aside from tonight and before and between that workshop and now, there's been no public meetings besides.
There was a 2 open space parks and rec commission meetings after that. And then we had a special study session dedicated to the ordinance with you guys in 2022. And then it got stalled. And then in 2024, we had the special study session with City Council.
I guess that's what I was referring to. We had the most recent special study session at the council, and then it went to the Open Space Commission, and now it's with us tonight. And
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that. Because obviously we have a pretty good turnout tonight, either for whatever reason, but I'm glad you sent notice to the affected parcels. That was a good move. If I understood correctly in your presentation, the tree removal provisions would be refined to no longer require use permits if the parcel was outside of the proposed GGMAs. It would be a simple tree permit, the more administrative of the ones, because that would kind of filter out the more sensitive locations. Is that the general thought?
Correct.
Okay, so that's I think a good refinement. And then let's see, one thing, and maybe I'll just forecast this. We don't have to get into a discussion, but that's not really fair to ask a question, not give you a chance to respond. But the idea of I think it's called the improved yard area. Is that right? So, that's going to be a challenging thing to reconcile as far as. I think of it, and I would offer that this might be a better definition, like the domesticated portion of the property, that's something that's been basically changed to a non-natural condition through human alteration or whatever. But that's sort of semantics. But how would we police someone doing that kind of on the, sort of surreptitiously or whatever, where they sort of colonize portions of their property? We're not going to be able to monitor that. But then they come in 10 years from now and say, well, this is an area that's an improved yard area, so I don't have to, be subject to the regulations. I don't know how to fix that.
Yeah. And we did get a public comment about potentially adding something like at the time of ordinance adoption to it, which
but that'd be so hard to know what that is.
Yeah. If they had the problem is not a problem. The great thing about Eureka is we have these giant tree canopies, but that would make it really hard to use aerial imagery in some areas. And so I would recommend too that people take pictures of their yards.
I'm almost reminded of like the cannabis growers, like prove that you had this domesticated condition at the time of the ordinance adoption, so that we don't have to, be looking for evidence of that in the future or wondering how. But that's just something I noticed. So I think we have a lot of people here to speak. I don't want to take too much more time up. So that's all my questions for now.
I have a couple as well. So this is kind of, following on what Commissioner Kraft already asked, but just to clarify, is it fair to say the expectation is that council has already weighed in on various elements of this and is generally aware of what's in it and is generally expecting it to come to them in the format that it's in?
So at the special study session with council, they were, we presented the idea of the parcel map versus having a specific line, and they were on board with that. And we also, there was like 6 different things that we talked about the different levels of permitting, the Gulch minor, the zoning clearance minor and conditional Gulch Greenway permit, and they were also supportive of that tiered permitting. And you're making me regret I didn't watch this right afterwards, but yeah, they and I think there's a link to that in your staff report. But yeah, we talked at a theoretical level because we didn't have a draft of an ordinance at that time. So we talked at a theoretical level about what it would look like.
Okay, that's helpful. And then a couple pretty specific questions. Did CDFW comment on the ordinance as drafted? Since it's being referred to them, have they weighed in on it at all?
Yes, they were really helpful, and we met multiple times. They commented multiple times. They've been on a few site visits with me too since then. So I wouldn't say they're 100% supportive of everything in it, but they have been weighing in. They even drew pictures for us and then got modified to added to the ordinance.
Are
But
there
yeah,
any sort of
most
outstanding
importantly for the definitional stuff is I think they added the most input.
Okay, but they're prepared to see it approved as drafted.
We have some staff here in the audience. I think they're going to talk during public comment, or you
perfect.
can ask them.
And then for the CEQA path, for projects that trigger a discretionary permit, is staff anticipating finding an exemption for small projects, or what? Can you kind of walk us through an example project and what a pathway could be?
Yeah, CEQA doesn't necessarily prohibit exemptions just because something is near a sensitive habitat. For things like if you're expanding the footprint of an existing structure or adding an accessory structure, it could potentially still meet a categorical exemption. Or if what you're doing qualifies as like restoration through reduction of vegetation. I don't know. There are some potential CEQA exemptions that could apply for some stuff regulated by the ordinance.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I'm asking, because, you know, when you see, it triggers CEQA, it's kind of scary sounding, you know, but I see a lot of projects come before us that receive exemptions anyway, especially for residential projects. Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Sorry, that reminded me of another question. Sorry. With regard to, you in your presentation talked about consultation with CDFW during the review process for things within the Colchin Greenway area. I guess what I'm wondering is how that would look under a zoning clearance. So if you were to send a referral to CDFW and they say, we want to see these trees planted or this, you know, be pulled back 5 feet. If it's a non-discretionary action, if it's a ministerial approval, and I'm saying that a zoning clearance is, I'm guessing that it is, but how would we even incorporate something like that?
What would be our hook for adding measures? I think what I was more contemplating was getting their help in certain situations to just ensure that we have the right edge of the Gulch Greenway management area. Since they're local and they're so willing to go on site visits, I was hoping that could potentially be a way to avoid having to, in certain cases where it's really obvious where the edge is and we can come to agreement about that in the field, then certain people won't have to do, detailed studies to determine where their wetlands and slope and things are.
And I think that's fair. I mean, as someone who works with them professionally, the local staff are very willing to be involved in project level review and help, broker solutions. So while we might not be able to, fundamentally require things, I think that is a fair use of their resources. And also, couldn't it be used to make sure that when we're trying to apply the standards that would apply to all discretionary and non-discretionary things, that we're correctly applying them?
Right. Like we added a caveat for if you're just doing like spot application of herbicide, so I could see them like going in or just checking that's what is happening, and therefore it is exempt.
Okay, and I think there was just one other. Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Okay. I think that's it.
Commissioner Benson, do you have any questions?
I think I want to reserve my questions to the end. I want to hear more so what public comment, and then also was informed that we do have CDFW members for public comment as well. Maybe they can answer some of my questions. So I want to go ahead with public comment.
All right. That sounds like a transition. So this is the time for public comment on this item. I want to tell you two things and then ask one favor. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes. There'll be a yellow light at 2.5. So at that point, you've got 30 seconds to wrap up. We've got a lot of people, so I will gently enforce that. And this is, as Commissioner Benson or Meyer said earlier, it's not a Q&A session, so we won't be answering questions, at least kind of live, although some of that may come up in the discussion. Some of those answers may come up in the discussion afterwards. And because there are a lot of people, and I'm expecting a number of you and folks on Zoom to want to comment, if the folks in the room could be at least 2 deep so we're not awkwardly looking at each other for the next person to come up, that'll help things move efficiently. So whoever would like to come up first. And please state your name and where you live.
I'm Bill Barnum. Is this on? All right, so what do we do about that?
Derek, the green light's on, but it just seems quiet.
Ah. Hello? Weird. Would you like me to speak loudly?
Bear with us just another minute here.
Oh, good.
Check, check.
I'm really sorry. You have to use a mic.
I'll try not to. So I'm Bill Barnum. I live on Pine Hill on Artino Street, have for the last 8 years. I'm going to put my comments into some historic context because I'm historic myself. I'm born and raised in Eureka. In 1960, I was attending Marshall School, and there was a sign out on the freeway that said the population of the city of Eureka was 28,137. So I checked online with the census data, and interestingly, the 2024 U.S. Census estimate population of the city of Eureka is now 25,412. So we have succeeded in decreasing our population by 10.7% over 65 years. Another thing I want to share, I practiced law here in Eureka for 43 years, most of it as a real estate attorney, and took great interest in all of the projects that the county was interested in. I want to share that sort of metaphorically with what this project's about. I think that this Gulch Greenway ordinance is just a boondoggle. It's going to complicate the lives of as many as 4,000 local residents, with 1,700 APNs being involved. I want to remind you that in 1995, the county did a Eureka Community Plan Area. Tom Conlon led that effort. Identified 1,200 potential home sites in the Dunn Robinson tract, Forster Gill tract, 300 for Slack and Winsler, and 200 for the Reardon Ranch. We're now 30 years post Eureka Community Plan Area, and we have an exciting announcement. There are exactly 2 new residences where 1,700 were planned. I would ask that the city ask seriously, why are we proposing this ordinance? I'd like to know, I don't have it before us, how many projects have there been in this Gulch Greenway ordinance area for the last 10 years? I would say, I'd likely guess it's in single digits. So I think this is much overdone. Also would add that our housing stock here in Eureka is actually, the median age of the housing stock in City of Eureka is older than I am, and I'm 70. So we have a shrinking population. We all agree we need more housing. All this is going to do is make things more expensive. And I fear, and it's a sincere fear, that it's really a Trojan horse project, that the purpose behind it is all the protections are there in state law, and Fish and Wildlife has it. I appreciate your comment about referral, because I think I could just delay projects forever. I think it could be used to diminish the value of properties that will later be taken for trails, and that's why I think it's a Trojan horse.
Thank you, Mr. Barnum.
Check, check. No. So what do you want me to do?
No, I don't think that's a good idea.
Just the one.
Yeah, then I'll turn this off.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Steven Santos, Eureka resident.
My opinions are based on my understanding of what I've been reading, and just so I'll admit, I might be wrong in how I'm interpreting it, but here are my thoughts. So it's my understanding by the reading of the ordinance is we have sort of these circles within a circle, right? We have our management area, which includes the buffer area per definitions B4 and B5. And then we have another outer ring that's part of the overlay, but is not considered management area. The overlay was described as being a screening tool where it starts the process to see if we're in the management area. But then when I look at table 224-1, there's another column in there saying, hey, we're regulating activities and requiring permits that are in that outer ring that aren't part of the management area. And that's the part that I object to. I don't understand why that is being proposed. It doesn't appear to be any findings in the resolution justifying that. And the definitions in the ordinance don't appear to define that outer ring as being part of the gulches and greenways. So I'd ask that to be examined and to see if that second column should be removed from that table. As an alternative, my next point is moot if that column's removed, and that has to do with the definition that Commissioner Lazar brought up having to do with improved outdoor area. That just exempts improved outdoor areas from the management area. But if my reading of the table is correct, even if you're in an have an improved area, you're still going to be subject to additional regulations and permitting requirements. So as a potential fallback, if you're not willing to consider or recommend to the council that they consider removing that other column, beef up the exemption provided by that section for improved management area to exempt it out of all of the regulations in the ordinance. And I'm happy to see the addition of the clarification for rubbish. That's good. I'd also like the commission to consider, as part of their recommendations to the council, that the council add to the department's work program to examine whether outdoor lighting, non-conforming outdoor lighting, can be sunset at some point, because we have all these established development along the gulches and greenways lighting up the canopy that affects nocturnal critters. And so I think at some future point, it should be considered as a way to sunset some of that non-conforming lighting that's causing big impacts. And that concludes my remarks. Thank you for considering my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Santos.
Joe Bonino, City of Eureka. Just have a couple points here. I think you need to insert something in writing into this ordinance about the ability to return to the original, whatever your home is or whatever your property is, for restoration after a natural disaster, such as an earthquake, weather, fire, mechanical failure, or other unforeseen bad happening. In other words, you could just rebuild, redo without having to deal with the city. Happenstances happen, things like plumbing. If you look into the Abrahamson property, you know what happened there many, many years ago. Number two, once again, this goes back to when I was on the Planning Commission. 12 inches is way too small for, or to prevent somebody from cutting down a tree. 24, when we were just debating this tree ordinance, I agreed to 24 just as a compromise, but 12 inches is ridiculous at breast height because, trees grow really fast around here. And what if you buy a house, that has something that's a little over 12 inches? You want to cut the tree down. That's just, so 24, you need to change that. The other thing is basically, a lot of these people have this property. It's worth, it's worth something as a residential lot. Basically, you're downzoning them. And so it's going to be worth less than it was before. I think that's wrong. I always fought against that when I was on the Planning Commission. So this is a downzoning. And then finally, Commissioner Meyer, you really cannot speak as a citizen, and you really shouldn't be in the room here. When I was on the commission, anybody who had had to recuse themselves had to leave the room. And if you remember, well, this might be before your time, but there was a commissioner in Fortuna named Deborah who got into a lot of trouble because she recused herself, and then she came up and started advocating for a position on the on the subject that they were talking about. She wound up in the newspaper and being embarrassed. She lost part of her business, and so I would recommend Commissioner Meyer that you do not say anything, and you really shouldn't be in the room. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bonino.
Okay, thank you. Mike Miles, a resident of Eureka and a D Street. Yeah, born in Eureka in 1970, raised in this area, have watched the green belts and enjoyed the green belts as a kid. Had my children and grandchildren playing those green belts. And, but like Mr. Barnum, it's the same thing. The city is not growing. The city is shrinking. There's a lack of housing. And so I'm against the ordinance. It does downvalue the zoning or downvalue the lots that people already own. So if you invested in something and now you've lost the value of that or have to go through a different hurdle, I don't agree with that. I do want to make it clear I am strongly believe in the wetland protection measures, and I believe in these waterways and setbacks. But I think you do that through a standard delineation using the Army Corps. You set back your 50 feet, your 100 feet, or you do a mitigation where you have to do equal or greater wetland construction somewhere else. But the use of a 500-year floodplain, I'm a licensed professional forester. I haven't seen a 500-year floodplain. I work in a heavily regulated environment. Nobody references a 500-year floodplain unless you're trying to make a big grab of land. So I'm not quite sure I understand. Is it a setback off the 500-year floodplain off of the wetland? And a lot of wetlands don't have floodplains, so I'm not sure how that functions, or if that's just establishing the bigger area that we're looking within. But again, let's focus on the wetlands and delineating those and then putting reasonable setbacks on those or mitigation for that. But these other things, the 12-inch tree, that's what really, and I submitted a letter the 13th of this month. I hope you get a chance to read it. But these ideas that I can't build a fence on my property, I have children playing down there. I want to have some privacy. I want to have some security. I don't want my kids running out, or my grandchildren in this case. I should have that right. I shouldn't have to come and get a permit to do that from somebody. Same thing with these trees. I mean, these trees will grow 90 feet in 30 years. There's mold issues, there's sunlight issues, there's winter storm issues. I shouldn't have to get a permit for an occasional tree of 18 inches that I want to cut before it gets too big, and then it becomes a real problem to take it down. So I really had a big issue with the tree removal, the fencing, and then the remodels. You have people who have houses or buildings that are deteriorating, and you want to make it tougher for them, or this ordinance would make it potentially tougher for them to clean that up. So you're kind of taking away the incentive to keep Eureka beautiful, and so I found that difficult too. But anyway, I appreciate it. So against the ordinance as written, but my letter describes, I think, the changes that are necessary that would make me supportive of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miles.
Hello, Commissioners. My name is Lawrence Kluk. I'm an owner of 6 lots along the golf course in Eureka. It's approximately 9 acres. I've owned it for more than 30 years. I've gotten permits twice and never developed the roads. We bought the properties. They were all bought in individual lots. It was subdivided in 1960 by Bill Thompson. We bought the lots separately from different owners. We've raised timber on that for 30 years. We've logged it 3 times. We may want to continue to log it. We won't be able to do that. They are separate parcels. We share a roadway with the golf course. The roadway's been in existence for 30, 40 years. And I'm here to exhaust our administrative remedies as suggested by the notice that I received from the city. I'm asking that we and other parcels be exempted from the Greenway plan. Currently, we have permits from the city of Eureka, and it's just to build the road, just to put in the infrastructure. It's not to subdivide. And we have permits for the city of Eureka, permit by the Army Corps of Engineers. We received that twice because it expired once. We've got a permit from State Water Quality, permit from the North Coast Regional Water Quality, construction site erosion control plan, wetlands delineation plan, and the project has been signed off by PG&E. why do we need to come in and get another permit? That it's just going to cause more expense, and I can see these organizations are going to come back in. These organizations are going to come back in and require us to go through this permitting process again. So I'm asking that certain properties be able to be exempted from this greenway plan. We've logged this property 3 times. It's growing. It's still heavily forested. We want to keep doing it until we actually build houses on it. So I'm asking the city, there should be some way to exempt certain properties from the greenway plan. The city has a lot of property. It should be limited to the city's property. They own all the property beside me. And why include our property? The city, they can put their property in if they want to, but I think that most of us private owners should be able to build on our property without more regulations. What's going to happen, as one of the speakers already said, it's going to lower the fair market value of all our properties.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Klug.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Arvin Law. I live in Cooper Gulch. I've lived there with my family for 20 years. I've lived in the Eureka area for 51 years and enjoyed my area, my neighborhood where I live. I make house payments every month on property that I own. You guys are placing an overlay that goes right through my house. You guys are enforcing rules and laws that don't exist on my property since I purchased it. That infringes on my right as a property owner to develop it, to repair it, to maintain it, and to choose what I plant or don't plant on my property. That is not fair, and that is incorrect. As echoed, I'll echo my fellow citizens that spoke on various things. There are already laws in place that take care of a lot of the things and address a lot of the subjects that you guys are trying to put into another format that's going to cause more paperwork, more requirements, and more subjective rules against those of us that own properties in these greenways. And I disagree. It is not correct. I live in already an improved area, sidewalk, street. You guys show a typical section that doesn't apply to my property. You're devaluing my property and those around us subjectively and arbitrarily. And that is unfair. And that is not right. You can see that I'm upset. This is what you're doing. There are already rules and regulations in place. Why do we need more rules and regulations in place? We take care of our neighborhood. We do things to improve our neighborhood. We clean up our neighborhood. We don't allow for abuse of our neighborhood without reporting it to our local authorities to help to keep it clean. I've been here several times when we have issues and we bring them up. We're responsible citizens that own our land. Please leave us alone.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, my name is Anna Hamilton. Thank you. I'd like to thank the staff for its thoughtful and thorough plans, and the City Council and the Planning Commission for all the work they're doing to protect the wildland wetlands here in Eureka, which will add to the property values as our quality of life is is protected by regulation. I'm here to propose integrating a fire hazard reduction plan in your trail management long-term planning by integrating the Humboldt Fire Safe Council's ability to secure grants for maintenance and vegetative removal. The risk of fire will substantially increase over the years as the climate change here is inevitable and has been obvious to anyone who lives here. I've been in Humboldt for 43 years. So I suggest that Eureka actively integrate the Fire Safe Council's activities with their trail management and their long-term trail management plans. Thank you very much. And I'd like to submit my thing to each of you.
Thank you, Ms.
Yes, I live in
Ms.
Eureka.
Hamilton.
14 years.
I'm Charles Stoneman. I reside at 1840 Monument Road in Rio Dell. I'm a registered professional forester, RPF number 2375. I'm just here to make a comment as I read this and hope to get clarity from staff eventually. As I read the ordinance, it exempts an approved timber harvest plan from the ordinance and no other conditional use permits are required. For my clients here in Eureka, I manage almost 200 acres of my client's property. These properties have been managed sustainably for over 50 years for its timber resources and also protecting the resources of the public, such as air, water, and water quality. We expect to continue doing that into the future. And I applaud, if I am correct, I applaud that an approved timber harvest plan is exempt. And I only request, by extension, that in retooling the tree ordinance, you also exempt a timber harvest plan from getting a conditional use permit for the tree ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stoneman. Yeah, if you would line up too deep, that'll help it keep things going. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Katie Rion, and I'm a biologist with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. As the trustee agency for the state's fish and wildlife resources, we support the Gulch Greenway Ordinance. Eureka's Gulch Greenways are a largely intact ecosystem in an urban landscape. Sloughs and coastal tributaries provide essential rearing habitat for coho and other fish, and headwaters serve as a cold water source and provide ideal habitat conditions for amphibians. The associated riparian vegetation is habitat for mammals, birds, and insects, and serves as a movement corridor for a variety of wildlife. Riparian buffers are a well-established means of tempering the effects of development. In addition to habitat benefits, these ecosystem services include floodwater attenuation, the protection of water quality, groundwater recharge, and the regulation of stream microclimate. Riparian forests contribute wood and organic matter to streams, which provides habitat complexity and supports the prey base that's so important to fish, amphibians, and birds. As you've seen, outside the coastal zone, the city currently has limited authority to protect streams and wetlands. For example, you can clear an entire parcel of riparian shrubs and smaller diameter trees with no permit from the city. And if you manage to skirt the much narrower jurisdiction of other agencies, you could theoretically obtain a building permit to build right next to a stream or wetland, and that's a ministerial permit. In addition to the direct habitat loss, this often leads to the spread of invasive plants, noise and light pollution, increased predation, and warmer water temperatures. Development also tends to increase stormwater runoff, with resultant increases in sediment and pollutant discharge and erosion. Discretionary review, such as proposed by this ordinance, would give the city the opportunity to evaluate and disclose these risks to the public and implement feasible minimization measures. As Steve Lazar pointed out, other local jurisdictions already have some form of protection for streams and wetlands, including Humboldt County, the city of Arcata, Fortuna, and Ferndale. I understand there are concerns the ordinance will undermine housing or hinder day-to-day residential activities, but there are permitting pathways for residential development, including subdivisions. The intent is to protect intact habitat, not to prevent landowners from managing their backyards. Finally, the city has made significant progress in upgrading infrastructure to improve habitat connectivity, such as the first Slough Fish Passage project. Other restoration efforts are the RCAA's work on Martin's Slough and the Elk River Estuary Enhancement Project. Millions of dollars have been spent, and I encourage the council to proceed. Thank you.
Next up, please.
Hi, my name is Gina. I live in the Greenbelt at 15th and M Street. I've been there since 1973. Born and raised in Eureka for the last 74 years. I find your ordinance invasive behavior in a human context. Rude and intrusive. Invasive behavior can involve actions that are disrespectful, pushy, or cross personal boundaries, which you guys are doing. Unwanted attention. This can include behaviors like uninvited visits, excessive questioning, or ignoring personal boundaries. Invasive behavior often demonstrates a lack of respect for other people's privacy, comfort, or feelings. I deem your ordinance invasive and intrusive. In November 22nd, you pulled out a storm drain on the right side of the gate of the gulch at 15th and M. It was so rusty and corroded it was full of holes. If it had died, it would have gone to heaven if it was human. It leached iron into the gulch as it was 102 years old. I went down to Cooper Park to record the sandy bottom because cohos need gravel substrate, which is not there. And you guys never got back to me about that. I found iron bacteria running down into the Cooper Creek. When you bulldoze the gulch, you expose the iron-rich dirt to oxygen and water, creating iron bacteria. It's never been in Cooper Creek before because I have been through that gulch tons of times recording all the garbage that no one cared about. And here's a sample that I took you can have. And I also have a USB with a video I edited just for you to prove it. So I hope you watch my video and you can keep the USB. I don't need it back. Rust in water can be harmful to coho salmon, particularly for young fish. Rust results in damaging their gills, causing respiratory problems and even death. Additionally, the runoff containing rust and other contaminants can negatively impact coho salmon by disrupting their natural environment, harming their overall health. It just messes them up. Stormwater runoff, like that darn pipe, can carry rust and other pollutants. It's particularly toxic to coho salmon, especially during their early life stages. That's just not good. Oxygen levels. Iron bacteria requires oxygen to function, so high levels of iron can deplete dissolved oxygen in the water. I'm surprised Fish and Game didn't bother doing a test on the water. Oops, 30 seconds. Okay, here's your sample. Here's your USB. All I know is I think you unleashed Pandora's box into the gulch with iron bacteria, and that's not okay. So much for Fish and Game. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina.
It's probably not live bacteria because I have a lid on it and use oxygen and water. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Hello, Commissioners. I'm Kelly Martin, born and raised here in Eureka. I have a lot on O Street that I've had for about close to 30 years. And It has the water meter already hooked up and had a lateral put in. PG&E removed one of the power lines over the middle of the lot so we can build there. Basically ready to submit my permit for a house, probably with a ADU attached to it. I bought the lot, but the lot's been obviously went up in value. So if this ordinance here goes in, it's a possibility that it's become zero value, which means I would still be paying taxes on it, but I couldn't give it away. So that's a concern for me, especially for what we paid for it and of the value that it gained over 30 years. A couple of my concerns is on the ordinances. One of them is cutting tree limbs in the middle of the winter. I live on the gulch on Martin Slough, and I have a lot of redwood trees, probably about 200 of them, and I have 6 grandkids. So I can't cut a limb. The only time in your special zone it said from June to October. Is that correct? That I could limb any widowmakers off my trees to protect them from falling on somebody. So I think that should be changed. I would like to get an exemption, if that's possible, for if my permit doesn't go through soon enough. I don't know how long the planning department's going to take to approve my permit if I submitted it today or tomorrow. But that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Others in the room?
Hi, I'm Greg Pearson. Live in Eureka. I'd like to speak against the ordinance. It seems to me like it's a solution looking for a problem. I don't really think we have much of a problem. There might be a one-off here or there, but generally, I think people like their backyards. They take good care of them, and they take a lot better care of them than the city seems to take care of some of their properties. So I think we can trust our local owners to take care of their properties. As a builder, I know it's difficult to get a permit. It takes time, it costs money, a lot of times there's research, you got to pay specialists, and who knows what, especially if CEQA does come into play. And these are complications that the average homeowner doesn't really understand, doesn't have the expertise for, and really shouldn't have to do. That was not anticipated when they paid prime prices for their properties, and so this shouldn't be done. It's going to take value away from the people, and that's inappropriate. I have bought that property on Harrison, the office there. There's a gulch that runs through there. I cleaned that up. It's almost like a park now. I got rid of some invasive species. And, you know, I still have the deer coming through there, and I have some of the little fox. You know what I don't have now? I don't have the homeless camping out there. And I don't have the break-ins as a result. So you need to let people manage their own property. I don't think we need you guys to do it for us. So I would suggest that we not approve this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Anybody else in the chambers who wants to speak?
Hello, I'm Joanne Mellandy. Was born and raised here, and I have 3 lots that have a gully behind it, and I'm concerned about this proposal. I don't want my fence to go down, number one, because you want more habitat space, and a lot of times I get homeless people behind my fence, so I don't want them in the yard. I would agree to something like don't plant invasive species, or don't use certain herbicides or something that's going to the water. That makes sense to me. But to devalue my property that I plan to hand down to my son, I totally disagree with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Chris Nelson. I reside at 1252 East Avenue in Eureka. I'm a fourth generation Eureka native. I've resided in the same residence for approximately 30 years. And I have great concerns about the potential ways that this will be placed either as an easement or a title deed restriction on people's private residences in terms of affecting how they may be transferring their property upon sale or further development. And I don't think that's been fully considered as to what kind of disclosures may be necessary as far as residential law and for the way that it would be handled as far as that, because easements and title deed restrictions have great impact on people's property values, especially when it comes time to title transfer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Raylene, things have slowed down in the room. Let's go to Zoom. So are you able to manage that?
So you've got 4. Dell, do you wanna go first?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Listen, my spouse and I purchased a property about over 10 years ago in Eureka, which is currently rented as a our dream retirement home, actually. We currently reside in Fortuna. But it's on the road, and we have in the contract for the rental that they do not develop it. I mean that the renter cannot, destroy anything. Or we love nature. That there are trees that you can reach from a window in this house. That said, we bought that property with the understanding that if we were ever impoverished, or if the need should arise to enlarge it, or in any way, we have 75 trees on the property, and that we could practically pay for the property with that. So I think that it's remarkable how many commenters are homeowners that are against this, and how many who are not homeowners in Eureka, who may or may not have some other vested interest in requiring socialized. I would call this a communist policy. I don't see any purpose for this regulation that helps Eureka taxpayers, and they do pay significant taxes, several $1,000s a year of your salaries. So I really think that Christine Kenyon is not a developer services agency. I feel like it's an anti-development agency, and it's over-regulation in search of a purpose. It's an unfunded mandate, which is going to cost. We had a forester look at it's hundreds of dollars to have a forester come or a biologist to come and tell you that you can cut this tree or you can't cut that tree. And some of that was understood, and we took it with the house. But to add to this is going to only unnecessarily decrease the value of our property, which I don't think your tax appraiser is going to do. Now, here's the real test. If and I do have a question. If you're going to do this, you might want to consult with CAL FIRE and the clearancing recommendations of 100 feet around the property. And I don't know how that's going to fit with all of this. But here's the test. Those people that want to do this should do it on their own property. They're welcome to buy my property if it's for sale, and they can feed the fishes and do all that. I used to be a Green Party member before I rised up, but I agree with the general principle, but I think regulating people down to the very private home is anti-American. It's just wrong, and I feel badly for the people here that own houses. And I would just like to say that if these activists really want this kind of regulation, and maybe a Trojan horse, as was postulated, if they do, they can buy their property, or they can.
Sir, that's time. Thank you.
We need to reimburse us. We need to reimburse the taxes.
Next person.
Chris Frankel, go ahead. Okay. Michael Munson, go ahead.
Raylene, you're just really quiet. So maybe Jessica can call the people instead.
Try this. Try again. Michael Munson, go ahead.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
All right.
Michael Munson, 1384 Nigel. I'm probably one of the larger landholders in the city limits that this is going to affect. Got several acres and several different parcels here in town. 100% of it is domesticated, for the record. But what I really have a problem with is when you look at the study that was done in 2022, the recommendations don't come anywhere near matching what what came out of that study. You go through and look at what what everybody recommended from that study, and then whoever wrote this, city or whoever it was, pretty much ignored it, which is pretty much par for the course for our city at this point, and just wrote what they wanted in there, not what was recommended. You take a look at what's going on there, as far as what you're allowed to do. I'm constantly on my property, all year long. I've got somebody in there doing work. We've got a lot of trees, hundreds of them. To echo what Kelly Martin said about, the safety factor of not being able to take care of your property, especially when you've got the size of trees I do around here, thinning, keeping them healthy. You need the power to be able to do that constantly. You talk about decreasing population here in Eureka. That's definitely been a factor. I think this directly conflicts with the regional housing needs assessment. It's really it's a power grab is what this is. I agree that it's a Trojan horse, but really the amount of hypocrisy that goes with it is what really gets me. You want to put this beta zoo trail right through the same property without CEQA, but yet if I want to build a fence, I might have to go through CEQA, requirements to get there. This is a case of do as I say, not as I do. I find it utterly disgusting that we're even considering this, and I would really request that you guys deny this. In the form that it's in, it is just a power grab. The state codes, zoning codes handle almost everything that's in here. We do not need this. I would really request that you think about this as the people who are going to be voting on this, on how hypocritical it is to let this beta zoo trail go in with no CEQA, and then we're going to be subject to all of it. The last point I'd like to make is when you look at this map, and Christy Kenyon hit on this, is most of this is very heavily covered. This map is extremely inaccurate where they put these lines on the slope lines. I put it over the top of mine, and I just had to laugh. Whoever did this, obviously they can't do a topographical photo map with the coverage, the canopy coverage we have here. This would have to, need to be some other process to make this map accurate. And I also agree that, the setbacks are not enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin.
Justin Buller, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Great. So this ordinance will simply just lead to more degradation of property. I live off of Vista Drive, and currently the city has storm drain runoff off of Vista Drive, O Street, and M Street that all run into the Martin Slough. The city needs to really reestablish these waterways, such as the Martin Slough, to allow water flow to prevent mosquitoes from proliferating, and to avoid more swamps becoming more difficult to manage, leading to more undesirable land conditions, not only for people, but for wildlife. I love my land, and I want to make it sustainable and enjoyable for the environment and my children. I work as a deputy attorney general for the state, and I deal with fish and game, the water boards all the time. There are extensive regulations that are already in place that cover nearly anything. CEQA, fish and game permits, water board permits, all of these things cover the very harm that we're trying to stop here. This will simply just lead to more unimproved land that will allow for more worse conditions to go. My land used to be a horse ranch. I have 6 acres here off of Vista Drive. And right now it is a swamp because of the storm drain runoff that the city has not maintained for over a decade. It's completely filled in, causing harm to the hills that it runs off of. And quite frankly, all it's going to lead to is less tax base for the city and more cost for the city who have to review these permits. It's not going to be a net positive. We don't have the specialists in town to do this. Let's let the experts at the state handle it with their already working permit process with Fish and Game and the water boards. This is just another redundant layer of regulations that's going to make development more difficult, leading to less housing, a dying city. And I want to make sure that we don't have a situation where we stifle development to a degree that it leads to worse land conditions all around for all of us, more mosquitoes biting our children, more ticks and fleas, where I can't even cut my yard waste and dump it in this area, what am I supposed to do with my yard trimmings? I mean, I'm trying to maintain my property so that it's safe and sustainable, and I really wish this planning commission would reject this proposal. Thank you for my time.
Thank you, Mr. Beller.
Rachel Smith, if you'd like to go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I live on B Street. I live in the Greenbelt, in the gully, not adjacent or nearby. My home and neighborhood would be impossible to build with the environmental rules of today. As with most of my neighbors, preserving what is left of the environment here is paramount. Most of our property is not buildable, which for us was a selling point. We have a view of wetlands and redwoods and enjoy all the native creatures sharing the land with us. I've been looking forward to the Gully and Greenways Ordinance, assuming that its purpose was to protect and preserve the last of the green spaces in Eureka. Instead, this ordinance is nothing but a duplicitous document that intends only to tax and create red tape for the residents of the Gully for the most mundane things like household maintenance, which simultaneously exempting the city of Eureka from any responsibility. Indeed, the residents of the gulches and greenways are held to the highest standards possible, while the city can destroy in perpetuity the most sensitive of our green spaces that it has pretended to protect. And the biologist who spoke earlier doesn't know what she's talking about, really needs to look into the Beta Zoo Trail. I agree with so many of the folks who spoke here. And I know I can't get answers to questions, but costs, we need to see the costs. What are the costs of your permits? Does the cost of a project affect the cost of a permit? You have to define more the curtilage. What are you talking about with the improved areas? With existing structures, you need to define maintenance. Do we have to ask permission to clean the moss off the roof? How about paint our house, wash our windows, clean our chimneys out? Our home was built in 1955, and so in an improved area. But since the entire home is in the GGMA, is very confusing, and like I'm just saying, needs to be fleshed out. And I also agree about the fencing. Why is a permit, are you going to have us come down to the planning department to put up a chain link fence? 10 feet, 50-foot fence, 50-foot long? We're gonna really come down there for that? I also feel that the term whenever feasible is completely subjective, open to interpretation, and needs to be struck from the document. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Smith.
Chris Frankel, if you would like to go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Hi, I'm Chris Frankel. I live on Jay Lane. I am a partial resident of Eureka because I travel for work. I actually decided to buy property in Eureka because of the redwoods, so I support the ordinance, but I do agree that it needs some modifications. So I have a list of comments that I wanted to make. One of the things that I didn't see addressed, ADUs are permitted because of the housing element. However, tiny houses, which are non-permanent, were not listed, but are, one tool in the toolbox for increasing density, which is now required in the state of California to allow more permitted conversions of your single family residence. The repair, which has been brought up by other people commenting, seems broad. Painting or replacing a roof, it really shouldn't require a permit to maintain, because all you're going to do is entice further degradation. So the only thing, there's no definition, and the footnote says only applies to projects that do not expand the footprint of the structure. So that area is a bit broad. The tree removal, things grow very quickly in Eureka. I have a redwood tree that is not mine. It is outside of my property, and will eventually touch the house. But I don't own it, so I can't touch it. And I would have to get permission from somebody else to do it. I have other trees that are on the property that I'm not sure if they're native, I'm not sure where they are, but they are also in proximity. I do think the area boundary that is shown and defined is a bit broad, and I understand the LIDAR, and it's hard to kind of narrow that down. But maybe that's something that you could be defining or refining some of the properties with a little bit more information. It is not clear on the timing of the process. Tree removal requires this, and this. How long is the process, with the city and possibly with other agencies that would need to be involved? Like a tree is about birds, it's about landscaping, it's about what you're allowed to do on the property and in the property. And some of that and the size of the tree.
That's time, Mrs. Frankel.
Okay.
Thank you. I don't see any more hands on Zoom.
That's all we've got in Zoom.
We have one person who doesn't know who's the raise hand function is not working. Evelyn Doyle. I want to ask her to unmute.
Evelyn, would you like to unmute and say your piece?
Yes, please. I believe can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I am concerned, as well as all the neighbors along my block here. I live off Lyndale Court and right behind Myrtle. Because when I bought this house, I had no idea about this encroachment upon this greenway. I knew that there was a gulch back behind me, but it was never mentioned when I was buying the house. So I've had to redo my roof, get new gutters, knock down the 2/3 of my deck, because the redwood tree was growing in the midst of that deck and pushed all the bones out of the way. So the people that I hired to do so, this cost me several $1,000s, and the roof alone is $30,000. So because of the redwood trees, I could not get solar because it blocks it. I am rather distraught to hear that this is going to decrease my property value if this passes. And secondly, I'm concerned about the taxation effect, because I already have had my taxes increased, I've had my mortgage increased, and I've been told that this is for property improvement. So I don't believe this is going to be improving my property at all. I don't go down into the gulch because I can't, and I'm not happy with it, and neither are any of my neighbors along this block. So I had asked if they could join us, but everybody was like they didn't know it was delayed till today. So I'm very thankful that Kristen came out yesterday and took a look at the gulch here. I appreciate your efforts, ma'am. And I hope that y'all are taking into consideration the people that this is affecting. Thank you very much for pulling this off.
Thank you, Ms. Doyle.
Prior to closing this public hearing, I need to put something on the record. We had a commissioner recuse herself for this matter, and it's Government Code Section 87200 and Government Code Section 87105 that address when a commissioner with a financial interest in a matter before this commission must exercise and meet certain legal duties, including recusal and identifying what that financial interest is, which occurred tonight. And it's important to make sure that all members who are entitled to speak tonight are given that opportunity. The implementing regulations for those government code sections that I mentioned are California Code of Regulation Title II, Section 18707 and 18704. Those implementing regulations address when a commissioner who's recused themselves for a financial interest in a matter being decided may remove themselves from the dais and be in the public for public comment, and that commissioner who removed or recused themselves may also give a public comment.
Okay, appreciate that.
We might have one more person.
I was just going to say, I'm not convinced we're absolutely done in the room. So line up if you have not made your comment yet.
Thank you.
Hello.
My name is Nick Hansen. I live at the end of O Street in Eureka. I've lived here for 25 years now. And I know I speak for myself, and I would imagine a lot of the other people that live along the Gulch and Greenway management areas. One of the reasons, at least I bought my house, was for the location. I'm backed up to Sequoia Park. I bought it not just because we loved the home, but we wanted to raise our kids in a spot where we're at. A few questions I had was, have there been environmental impacts noted or studies and surveys done from the privately owned properties to draw concerns to start this? I know it was stated earlier, 60% of the Gulch and Greenway zones are residentially owned and 38% are city owned. What percentage, if any, issues are occurring currently are coming from one or the other? I know I'm going to echo a few other things that were said as well, but one of the things I had noted was, as Mike Munson had mentioned, in the study session, some of the numbers as far as the distances were shorter than what is actually listed in this document. So that was one question or issue that I saw. Another one was if this is for protecting the health, safety, and welfare, this is going to affect the welfare of all the property owners just because of the decrease in property value. I know for myself, I didn't choose to live in a coastal zone. I didn't choose to buy a historical property because I didn't want to have to deal with those issues. And so now owning my property and having to deal with those issues, there was nothing that was ever thought of that was going to come to fruition at this point. Another thing that was noted was that Fish and Wildlife had come up with their own lines and map. I was just curious where that lined up with the existing map that's being shown. And then, again, I think that there is something deeper beneath this, not just for protecting, because with the state level laws and regulations that are already in place, the fact that they're to protect the wetlands that are already existing, why do we need to have more? So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, last chance. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion. A lot to chew on here.
I would suggest, why don't we invite our fellow commissioner who didn't speak at the beginning to speak now, because I think he said he wanted to hear public comment first.
It's a good idea. Commissioner Benson, would you like to start us off?
Let me unmute him.
Okay, we there?
All right, Michael, we got you.
Yeah, okay. First, I just want to thank everyone for coming today. I hear every single one of you, and for the most part, agree with most of you. I believe that this entire thing is intrusive. I think it takes away the rights of a property owner. Every one of you property owners spend a lot of money. You spend a lot of money in taxes. You spend a lot of money in cleanup, repairs. The list goes on and on. Anyone that owns a home knows this. And I just feel like, I want to touch on a couple different people that spoke. One was Katie with CDFW. And I would just be curious if you supported this greenway ordinance if you owned one of these properties, because from my experience in Humboldt, the last 13 years, the government overreach and oversight is extremely extensive. It is so hard to get permits to do anything. Everything you try to do costs this, costs that. I feel like the best steward of the land is the property owner. Specifically, if you listen to these people, they bought properties in these areas to be stewards of the land. Everything that I've seen that government touches, city touches, they don't have the funding to even regulate it. Most of this property management is done by the property owner because it's the property owner has the money to do that. And not even the money to do that. Sometimes they just overreach and they do it anyways because they love their land. Who else did I want to touch on? Oh, I thought some interesting stats that Eureka has decreased 10% since 1960. This is one of the prettiest places in the United States, and for that stat to be a stat is, in my opinion, gross. One of the big reasons that is a stat is how difficult and how expensive it is to do things in the government overreach. I just feel like this is extremely short-sighted. I don't really know the bigger plan to this. And to me, like, I mean, you can't cut down a 12-inch tree. I have redwoods surrounding my house. And someone had mentioned the widowmakers. Yeah, I have those too. And for someone to tell me that I can't cut that down to protect my family, that would bother me. The fact that this will decrease the value in multitude of people's homes and land that they purchased. I mean, it's hard for me to even contemplate and okaying that. So, I mean, this is kind of a touchy subject for me, and I feel for all of you, and that's just how I feel on the matter. Anyone else?
Thank you, Commissioner Benson.
It is a bit hard to know where to go from here, but I did want to say a couple of things before we get into the details, and there probably will be many details. The first is I just would like to thank our representative from CDFW for being here tonight. This is something you're volunteering to do. I'm sure you are an expert in your field, and we appreciate you being here, and we appreciate the role that you're playing. And I also wanted to just note, you know, I am hearing a lot of, concern about change. This is something that is totally new and unexpected. People bought properties without these regulations being on the books. I heard somebody say, why do we need more rules and regulations in place? And I just wanted to remind folks that this was not a decision made by the Planning Commission or by staff. This was the City Council's decision, and we're here to try and make the best ordinance we can. That's really our role. So I think it would make sense for us to discuss what could make it more effective, not whether or not it's going to happen. If we deny it, the council will still discuss it. You'll still have the opportunity to go to those meetings as well and share your opinion with your elected representatives. So I wanted just to put that out there and see if other members of the commission had specific items that they wanted to see added or removed to the ordinance.
Well, before we get into ordinance specific, I just want to acknowledge everyone's presence. You know, public participation is essential, and whether I agree with everyone in the room or not, I'm grateful that you're here. It makes for a better outcome for everyone. So I do hear a lot of fear, a lot of suspicion, a lot of frustration. And I think that's warranted, frankly. I think the trajectory of this, we can all agree, It's coming to us tonight, and it's had a bumpy road, and there's been points along the way for public review and discussion, but it's never enough to make everybody calibrated to what to expect and whether they feel comfortable or not. That remains a question for everyone. I do think part of the confusion and misunderstanding or lack of understanding is born of the regulations themselves. They're unclear on a number of items. I think I can agree with some of the speakers tonight. I also think that it's the suspicion and fear driving some of people's interpretation of the regulations. Because as I see it, and I'll just characterize it as I see it, if you looked at a continuum from the most intrusive possible, restrictive, steal all of your property rights, to the zero, nothing, do nothing, the status quo, this is maybe 10% off of status quo as far as I see it. Because I don't see anyone losing anything as a result of this other than time and money, which has been pointed out. I think that's fair. Those are fair criticisms, And I'm not saying those are trivial, but I want to say that there's the far end of that spectrum, and we're not talking about that. But you would think from some of the comments we heard tonight that we're taking away your property rights, that we're reducing everything. Excuse me. So I want to just be clear, that's my review of what we have before us tonight. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I do think it's important to point out the regulations allow you to, as far as I can see, do everything that you can do today, but they require, in certain circumstances, additional permission through a discretionary process and additional expense. That's my understanding of the regulations. And I'm not saying everyone should accept that or be happy with that, but let's be clear about what the consequence of this would be if adopted in its current form. Because I don't know that was clear in some of the testimony we heard tonight. So I just wanted to get that on the record. And then I think that, I want to thank our staff from CDFW for coming tonight. That is helpful. I want to thank all the people that spoke who own properties. I definitely empathize, even if I'm not immediately joining your side. It's not that. It's that we have to think of the whole of it. And I do want to point out historically, because people like to point that out, that, cite historical trends. The reality is there's lots of greenways and open spaces that have been erased from the map, that are culverted, that are underground, that are subterranean, that have been lost. And that's just what happened in the course of the city's history. But let's not lose sight of what we're talking about is the last of what remains. And it's been chipped away at, it's been filled in over time. It's been, that is a very scarce resource, down to the point where what we have is a fraction of what historically once existed. And that's just what happened. But I do think I agree with Commissioner Benson in that homeowners are naturally good stewards of the land generally. And I do think that we don't want to get in the way of that through unnecessary permits for routine types of activities that would otherwise be expected. Like when Kelly's talking about limbing trees during the wintertime because they're posing a risk to his property. Let's not make it to where somebody has to get down to the planning department at, on a work day when there's a risk of a widowmaker. That would be unfortunate. There's a difference between taking a limb off and taking a tree down, So there's difference. I think what I would say is clearly, as far as the balance, given the testimony tonight, we should be shooting for is as much ministerial, non-subjective coverage as possible through standards that are objective and not subjective. That's what I'm hearing the rest of the feedback would be in support of, and making as many things that don't require any engagement with the department as possible. But where that line goes as far as the regulations and what that should be, we're not going to be able to do that on the fly tonight. But I do think that would be what I would recommend and if should this advance to the council, that they really look at broadening the range of activities that might be otherwise subject to discretion, and making them more ministerial in nature, and lowering the permitting requirements for some things that are status quo types of things that are not necessarily inherently problematic. Those are the types of, from what I heard tonight, those are the types of things that I think could get us closer to some of the testimony we heard. So that's what I'll start with, I guess.
I was going through my notes from the public comments, and a few things jump out to me either as repeated themes we're thinking about, or just really made sense. I think in the latter category, Mr. Benino's speaking about being able to return after a disaster. I do think that's a situation that is worth some additional work. You know, what if there's a natural or man-made disaster, how would that affect and ideally streamline what might be required? I think in terms of what Commissioner Lazar was saying, you know, the expense and the downzoning, you know, both there's costs and time involved with complying with this. There may be property value reductions. I don't know that we solved that. You know, I opened my questions early on by saying I would have, you know, a different take if I was an elected member of the council. And I do think that, you know, our role here is narrower. So I'm inclined in some way to see if we can move this forward. But I would, as a citizen, share a lot of the concerns in the room and you know, would just be honest to all of you and say, you know, I would show up to the council meeting and make my views heard, because that's where the policy gets done. You know, we're lower court judges in this analogy. They're the lawmakers. And in addition to limbing, one of the themes I heard repeatedly was 12 inches is too small. And this room is looking at an idiot who planted redwood trees on purpose at one point. And I may have gotten them cut down before they were 12 inches in diameter, but they got there very fast. So I think that's specific, along with the limbing and when we're allowed, when property owners are allowed to make those, would be worth looking at. Did you want to say something, Director Kennedy?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to the limbing. There's no permit required for limbing in the only thing that's in the tree removal regulations is alteration, which is reduction of the crown by 20% or more, or something that, and in that section, if you are removing a protected tree, removing or reducing the crown by 20%, then you have, if it's the bird nesting season, you have to check for birds. Otherwise, if you're just limbing, there's no permit required, and the standard that applies says during the bird nesting season, disturbance to vegetation should be avoided, you know, but it's not a requirement.
Okay, that's helpful.
One quick follow-up on that. For hazard tree removals, can you remind us, is a permit required for those?
Currently, to remove a hazard tree, you have to get a zoning clearance and with a report from an arborist or a registered forester saying that it is hazardous, and that would continue under the ordinance, both in and outside of the GGMA.
Okay, thank you.
So there's no change to that proposed.
So with that, any other?
So thanks for bringing up a few of those. So could we get clarification or just confirmation on the 12 inches? It is 12 inches the proposed threshold for the ordinance?
It is for the GGM, inside the GGMA.
Outside it really wouldn't be.
It would be 24 inches. Native tree would be protected, as is now.
Right. The scenario of a casualty, if somebody's tree fell on their house and destroyed their house and they had to rebuild it, would they be able to rebuild it in its current footprint?
I would recommend us adding a caveat to the table for that.
Okay. That's pretty common, and coastal regulations have similar provisions even. What about the question that we had about the THPs and whether they're exempt under the...
Currently, if you're removing 5 or more trees, you need a conditional use. In 10 years, you need a conditional use permit. And now, if you're in the GGMA, you need a discretionary permit. The same. It's just now it's a Gulch Greenway conditional permit with different findings.
Okay.
So that was for a timber harvest plan?
As well, yeah.
So you would need a permit?
Correct.
Okay.
So
which is what you need now. You need a conditional use permit now for a timber harvest plan in the city, and you've needed that since since we started regulating in the 60s.
So I'm just going to put that less flatteringly, which is we do have additional regulatory blanketing of something that requires regulation through CAL FIRE under a separate process.
Right, and that could be a recommendation that we don't need that if CAL FIRE has it.
I think in the city of Arcata, yeah, it's considered a functional equivalent, I believe, at least for purposes of CEQA. So that could be something to explore.
I would appreciate it if you guys have, because I'm getting conflicting comments. So if you have, when you make your motion, if you could add the recommendations to it so I know they're coming from the Planning Commission, that would be helpful.
Yeah, we'll make sure to do that.
Okay, so I just want to clarify or just confirm. Am I right in my characterization that anything you can do on your property today, you'll be able to theoretically do should these regulations be adopted, but you may be subject to additional permitting and expense?
Correct. The county ordinance says you can only do a few things. Our ordinance says you can continue to do everything you can do now. We just have this new special permit requirement that the county already has.
Okay. Well, that's helpful to get confirmation. I think that clearly falls short of where some folks in our audience would like it to go. But I acknowledge that, and I just want to make that clear. And then I just, since we heard a lot about Kelly Martin, he could theoretically, I think what you said at the beginning of the hearing was, if we have a complete application, doesn't matter when we issue the building permit, it could be now, it could be 10 years from now, theoretically, it will be subject to the rules in place at the time the application was deemed complete, not these rules.
Right. So if you submit a complete application, it doesn't matter how long it takes us to review it. Once we review it, if it was complete, it's complete.
Right. So just word to the wise, if folks were considering that, like Kelly, that would be an option for you to not have to be worrying with new rules. Once again, I just want to point out, it has to be complete, it doesn't have to be approved. I think that's, I mean, as far, sorry. Please, I did, and I'm not going to have a back and forth, so I think it's clear to most of the folks in the room. I don't think I saw any other specific things that I needed to bring up. So,
Commissioner Freitas, anything more?
There were 3 things that I heard mentioned that if other members of the commission were interested in discussing, I would be interested in discussing as ways to suggest modifications to the ordinance. One was the diameter of the trees, fencing, and invasive plant prohibitions. If anyone would like to discuss those, I am open to that. If not, I would be fine with suggesting it as proposed, and we can discuss it further at that point.
I'd be interested in hearing more about your thoughts on the invasive plant part.
And fencing for me. So thanks I did write that down, but I missed it. So thanks.
Yeah. So my understanding is that there currently is a list of invasive plant species that are prohibited, but it will be expanded for all projects. Can you just run us through what was changing?
Currently, our landscaping regulations only apply to required landscaping. So landscaping is required in mixed-use zones and for multifamily developments between the building and the street. And so in those required landscaping areas, we currently have a provision that says that planting of invasives is prohibited. It would be, under the way it's proposed to be amended, planting of invasives in the city would be prohibited, regardless of whether it was required landscaping or you're just doing it voluntarily. You're no longer allowed to plant invasive plants. Does that make sense?
I think it does, yeah. And this is a really specific question, so no worries if you can't answer it. But do you know roughly how many species are on that list? Is it like 50, 100? How many are on there?
Of the Cal IPC or the Humboldt Weed Management Area.
Yeah, how many would be currently prohibited under current regulations?
We don't have a list of species. We reference the California highly invasive species that
So it might be like
I've looked
100.
at that list extensively, and it's pretty long. I would say maybe like 100.
Okay.
And any sense of how many would be added by adding the Humboldt take? I didn't get the organization down, but
I think it would be kind of consistent with each other, but I don't
know. Where that came from was when we went to the Open Space Parks and Rec Commission, somebody from the Humboldt Weed Management Area came up and spoke and said that some species that are highly invasive up here, like maybe a type of Scotch broom or something they mentioned, isn't considered statewide, but is really aggressive here. So they recommended adding the list of invasive weeds that the local agency, and I talked to CDFW staff about that, and they said to that doesn't always get updated or isn't as comprehensive, but they recommended keeping the California list as, but they were fine with adding that as well. So that's how we got to it.
And ballpark, do you know how many species that?
I'm going to pull it up right now.
Okay. And maybe pivot to the fencing part while she's looking.
Sure, yeah. And I have kind of mixed feelings on the invasive stuff. I definitely understand it 100%. But, I could see somebody in a totally developed lot in Cooper Gulch wanting to plant like crocosmia and being like, upset about not being able to do that in an urbanized area. Okay, and then for fencing, my understanding is you can still install or repair fencing, but you would be required to come in for a permit. Is that correct?
In the Gulch Greenway Management Area. But if you already have a fence, that would count as part of your improved yard area. And so existing fencing would not be in the GGMA. It's just if you were going to like push the fence further, if maybe you're on if you're on the steep slope and you want to push the fence down the steep slope, then you would trigger. And it is the conditional Gulch Greenway permit, which is the more difficult, time consuming and expensive of them. So if you wanted to recommend separating that out, or the whole thing could become a minor, or maybe that's lumped with accessory structures, so maybe it's smaller accessory structures would also be minor. In our building code, you don't need a permit for accessory structure. Gosh, do you remember the exact square footage? 120 square feet or smaller.
With no foundation or any electrical or plumbing hookups.
Honestly, we would be ridiculous if we went out and enforced, we're not going to aggressively enforce stuff in your, as the director who oversees code enforcement.
Yeah, I would maybe be interested in seeing if others on the commission would be willing to make a lower threshold for fencing. But I do understand, the purpose of it, I'm assuming, is for wildlife passage, which is something I would like to see supported. So thoughts on the fencing piece from the commission, including our commissioner on Zoom?
I would.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Commissioner Benson.
My thoughts on someone wanting to put a fence in their own yard is they should be able to put a fence in their own yard. It's that simple.
I disagree, so I'll just chime in. I don't see them the same. If you're putting a fence in the Gulch, I'm more interested in having that discussion. I'd like to see a way of doing it where we don't require a permit and it's pre-approved. So if it's like wildlife compatible fencing, that to me would be an easy way to kind of provide a pathway so that there's not a barrier to people doing something that's normal, like Commissioner Benson is saying. But I don't think that all fences are equal in all situations. And that's absolutely at the heart and soul of these regulations as far as protecting the green belts, is that they do provide habitat connectivity to wildlife. So all the people that like to talk about it, that they have the wildlife in their backyard, but don't want to let the wildlife go through the portion of the yard that they fence, I see hypocrisy there. So to me, like, I want to find a happy, middle ground, and I'd be happy to have that discussion, but I don't know that we're experts in that. But if we were to arrive at a recommendation, my recommendation would be to find a way of allowing pre-approved fencing that meets certain standards that then does not require any scrutiny or permitting through the city if it's built to those standards in those situations.
I think in the earlier draft of the ordinance, there was wildlife-friendly fencing and maybe a description of it.
I don't know if that sounds okay to some of you, but that would be I'd be favorable to that.
So just to clarify, your suggestion would be to keep the current permitting structure, but exempt certain types of fencing.
Yeah, I think wildlife-friendly fencing, that's the main concern I have.
Okay.
And then maybe revisit the setback for fencing as it approaches the break and slope, maybe have some sweet spot where you're beyond the break and slope, but you're within 25 feet. I'm not saying this should be the rules, but like maybe we give some flexibility in that initial range. But if you're going to put it all the way at the toe of the slope in the middle of the gulch to prevent anybody from getting in that area, including critters, I would think that completely defeats part of what we're trying to do with these regulations, whether you agree or disagree. So I wouldn't be favorable of all fencing in all places in the greenway.
Would you want to combine this with dropping it to a minor use permit?
I think in that upper area where the break and slope is, in that transitional zone, maybe say within 25 feet of the break and slope, that would be, I think, a fair number to start off with as reducing the standard or the permitting requirements for that area, and then exempting all fencing if wildlife friendly anywhere, maybe, and that would get us closer to kind of some of the comments we're hearing.
Yeah, I like that.
Director Kenyon, do you have a report back on the number of species, invasive plant species?
No, I'm struggling. I have like all the WMAs on my phone and I can't find Humboldt for some reason, even though it's in alphabetical order. It's like, but getting back to that, if I could see having where the permit's different depending on if you're in you're in the GGMA because you're in a buffer versus you're in the GGMA because you're in a wetland or a stream for fencing, because you would potentially want fencing in a buffer to.
Well, we did hear a testimony tonight that was kind of asking that question as to how is the buffer different from the formal GGMA, and I think this is illustrating that, when I'm talking about the suggestion, I'm not talking about all areas that have been caught by the net, that is the zoning overlay, but really where you're actually within a GGMA and you're at that interface between where the gulch begins, because there's a clear change in elevation as it starts to depress. That's where I would say once you go beyond that break and slope, you're starting to get into the area that's naturally a riparian corridor and naturally the kind of thing that has the highest wildlife value and would be of most importance to protect. So where we have a kind of squishy 25-foot, 10-foot, whatever area where you can put a fence that doesn't have to be wildlife friendly, without any specialized permitting requirements beyond what would otherwise be allowed today. Does that make sense, Director? Does that help clarify it?
Yeah.
Okay.
If I'm just in the city, not in a special zone, do I need a permit to build a fence?
If it's over 7 feet, if it's 7 feet or taller, it needs to be engineered and it needs a building permit. And then we have fencing regulations that are one of my least favorite regulations that go into detail about what type of fencing is allowed where. That applies everywhere.
Well, it's kind of a theme of the Planning Commission that I suck at crafting motions. It sounds like we've got ideas around fencing, maybe about limbing, maybe about 12-inch trees versus 24-inch trees, and the disaster thing. Does anybody want to try to craft something, starting with the recommended motion to package that?
I think I can do that. But I would like to hear from our non-physical commissioner because we've been talking in the room, but I haven't heard any responses.
Commissioner Benson?
In regards to what the ordinance, I mean, I honestly put the whole thing in the trash. That's how I feel about it. So, I mean, just try to compromise and have a bunch of word salad going on. Like, to me, this is just infringing on the rights of people, and I don't like it.
I want to echo Commissioner Kraft's comment that I would suggest that the commission, before you make this motion, we need a clean motion because there's going to be, I think, several recommended modifications. So if you could, kind of collect your thoughts to deliver as clean a motion as possible, that will help staff.
And circling back, I found the Humboldt weed management, and it's like 41 plants.
Is that something we need to cover in our motion? Okay.
So Commissioner Lazar, if you're planning to make the motion, it sounded like the limbing piece was good to go. We didn't need a permit for that.
Unless you're affecting more than 25% of the crown, right?
Correct, if you're topping.
Okay.
And then I did not hear Commissioner Kraft mention the suggestion regarding CAL FIRE exemptions, or maybe he didn't, I missed that. But I just want to make sure we added that as maybe a suggestion to explore. It seems like it makes sense to me, but I'm not a forester, so.
Yeah, I'm happy to include that. I'm still processing in my head, frankly. Certainly we heard tonight, and the council will continue to hear that this is viewed as unnecessary and extraneous. So I'm sensitive to that. I do think CAL FIRE rules lack some sensitivity when it comes to things that are nuanced, like our gulches. But they've historically been what's been the only regulations in town for these areas, with the exception of state agencies. Oh, excuse me. So I think I'll include it in the motion. We can all vote, and that'll be fine. I did want to get back to, before we move to that, just because I want to make sure I understand, and others do, the difference between the zoning overlay and the formalized GGMA, or the Gulch and Greenway areas. So I'll offer how I'm interpreting it, which could be wrong, and then you can, Director Kenyon, you can clarify. But I see it as a blanket. So if we throw the blanket and it catches some of the parcels in the city, and some of them don't deserve to be caught, then they screen out when we start looking at the circumstances on the ground. And though you're technically in the zoning overlay, it has zero bearing on your ability to develop your site, because you don't have the criteria or the characteristics that are what we're trying to additionally regulate or protect. Is that fair? Or are there
yes,
still
but
some
there's a
lingering
caveat.
things?
So,
Yeah.
Which Mr. Santos got to, is that the idea was, in creating that blanket, was the thought that what in the edge of this steep slope, and then 100 feet beyond, was the idea that in a lot of our slopes we have wetland seeps. If we want a 100-foot buffer at the most from a wetland, that if you go to the break and slope and go 100 feet, you're conservatively including anything that could potentially be defined as GGMA, and just doing it consistently at the outset with a consistent buffer, so that we're not using subjective to draw the line politically. And then the idea was that what we heard a lot before, when from in the planning effort that went on in the 2000s, and then in 2022 when I was working on it earlier, was that there's a lot of concern about not just in the Gulch, but how development within 100 feet of it affects the health of the gulch. And so what it's showing is, in the overlay, you still have to comply with the standards of the ordinance. And most of those standards are just pointing to standards we already have. They're saying like, hey, check out our lighting standards, our landscaping standards, our stormwater standards, and just kind of explaining like what is already required of you as a good steward of being adjacent to the gulch. But then in the table, right, if you're in the GGMA, there's the additional, that's when you might trigger a discretionary minor gulch greenway permit. And then the other part of the table, the second column, is when you're in the overlay, but not in the GGMA. And in those areas, you either get to it's either permitted by right or with a zoning clearance. And a lot of the stuff you already need a building permit for, or a grading permit. And so the zoning clearance just means when we intake your building permit, we'll refer it to CDFW and we'll make sure it's compliant with the standards. But the issue would be in areas where that there is no requirement for a building permit or grading permit now, that then now would require a zoning clearance. Then you would have to come in for a zoning clearance. So it would be an additional permitting thing. It would still be administrative and much quicker and lower cost than the discretionary permitting. So there's one place in the table where it says, for repairing, maintaining, and remodeling an existing structure in the GGMA, it says zoning clearance, but then the caveat is it's only required if a building permit is required. And then it's permitted by right in the overlay. But there could be other places in the overlay where or throughout the overlay that's not the GGMA, you could add a caveat that says like you only need zoning clearance if you would otherwise need a building permit or grading permit. And then we wouldn't be adding any additional zoning clearance requirements within the overlay, but outside of the GGMA.
Okay, I'm going to take a stab at summarizing that. I understood what you said, I think. We'll find out, I guess, when I try to summarize it. But what I hear is that on one side of the line, if you're in the GGMA, then there are additional permitting requirements that could apply. Whereas if you're on the other side of the line, there would be no discretionary permit that would apply, but there'd be standards that you'd be subject to that you're not maybe currently subject to, or maybe you are, but you're not as well aware because it's buried in other parts of the code or something like that. So you do get under the blanket when the blanket gets thrown, but you're not subject to additional permit requirements, just standards of the regulations that are new that might affect what you do to some extent, I think. I mean, the standards are there to implement goals of the protections of the...
Sorry. So the standards are work in seasonal wetlands, and then the water quality sites are existing stormwater and construction site erosion control standards. Outdoor lighting sites are existing outdoor lighting standards. Tree removal, sites of tree removal section. Bird nesting, it's the not required, but like we recommend avoiding the bird nesting season. Invasive plants and weeds, it references our rubbish section and our invasive plant prohibition. And then temporary ground disturbance, it says to, do your best to, like if it's disturbed, you want to reseed it and before it rains. And then the one big one is the subdivision one, where it talks about if you're creating new parcels, don't create like GGMA only parcels that are
Make sure they have development areas outside of the gulch.
Yeah, but there's even a caveat that says that you can do that.
I saw that. That's why I described it as nothing's actually stopped at all by these regulations, because with discretion, we can still allow everything that's currently allowed.
And the argument is that now it will get environmental review and the provisions of CEQA to consider alternatives and minimization.
So this is complex. I just felt like we needed to cover that before we got too far out on our motion, because it is, I think, something that some of us are struggling with, myself included. And to me, it signals this is a place in the regulations where if we're talking about trying to lower the level of frustration of some of the comments we heard today, the low-hanging fruit are by removing the requirement to consult at the front counter on these types of things through this quasi ministerial process where you come in, talk to the staff, or and then get blessed on what you're doing is consistent with the regulations. Like trusting people to do it, I think is naive. But I also think that with good public outreach and education, you can achieve some of the goals. And some of these things are being done, completely unaware of that they're consistent with these requirements. So I would say that's a place where lowering the number of times someone has to come in and get approval through staff for something that's not even discretionary, but is really just a check. That would be an easy thing to kind of help address some of the frustrations we're hearing tonight. And in a recommendation, it would be to remove where it says ZCC in the table. I would think it would be P, right, to some extent. Principally permitted, don't need to come get any. So that could be something we include in our recommendation if we're interested in that. And I would be okay with that because the council will ultimately get to decide what the right balance is. But I think is introducing that as a way to kind of start to lower the temperature for some of the folks, I think that would be an easy place without sacrificing the goals of the regulations. Okay. Does anyone want to say anything else, even if they don't want to support it, before we move into a motion mode?
No, but good luck with your motion.
Ugh.
Do you want me to pull up the
Please.
slide? Okay.
So just as far as the list of things that we want to include that are sort of not baked in the core motion, can we just kind of do a quick punch list here? So I got the fencing recommendation, the casualty scenario, the limbing is not needed to be addressed, the THP exemption, hazard tree is already covered. I said fencing. No, fencing. Yeah, I said fencing. And then invasive plants. We don't need to include that, right? Or do we?
I mean, I think I'm comfortable with it as written. I don't have a suggestion about how to modify it at this point.
Is there any other things on our punch list?
Disaster.
Yep, that's the casualty.
And okay, wasn't sure if that was natural disaster happens or I fear this thing's going to fall on my kids. So
burn your house to the ground by accident or the thing falls in.
And did you get the 12-inch?
Yeah.
What about the table? You had just suggested making some items permitted instead of with a zoning clearance. Do you think we should bring up the table and look at that, or just have it as a suggestion?
I mean, I'm open to it if you'd like. It's pretty easy to pull up, I think. Right?
Would you guys mind bringing up the table that
Yeah,
Commissioner Lazar was talking about?
With that. Okay.
I think that's a good idea. I just want to see everything that's on it before we go ahead and streamline all of it.
So 224-1.
Is that big enough, or do you want me to zoom in?
Yeah.
I think it's okay.
I think I can read it now. So the outside GGMA column is the column 2 that Director Kenyon was talking about. So things that say ZC would be P if we were to tackle them.
Right. I mean, we already do a zoning clearance on every building permit. So
can't remove that.
I would recommend just, if you want to limit it, saying if you only need a zoning clearance, if you already need a building permit or grading permit.
So that could just be a footnote to the table.
Correct.
Yeah. Do we like that as a general rule and just stick with that?
Works for me.
Yeah.
Okay. So footnote. Only required with BP. Okay. Okay. Well, I guess I'll take a stab at it. So I move the Planning Commission adopt a resolution recommending City Council adopt the Gulch Greenway Overlay Zone mapping and ordinance and associated municipal code updates with minor modifications recommended by staff to fix the reference to the new GG overlay ordinance in the tree removal regulations and add the GG overlay standard prohibiting rubbish in the Greenway Gulch MA, including disposal of yard waste in compliance with Eureka Municipal Code 94.15 at SEC. With the following additional recommendations, that the council consider modifying the regulations to authorize rebuild of structures within a GGMA destroyed by casualty or natural disaster without any additional permitting requirements. That there be an exemption for activities already regulated under a timber harvest plan. That there be an exemption from special fencing requirements if fencing if wildlife free or wildlife safe, is that the word, wildlife safe fencing be
Friendly?
wildlife friendly fencing not require additional permitting, and that the council consider giving some ability to construct fencing within 10 or 20 feet of the slope break, even if not wildlife friendly, and that the uses in the second column, the outside the GGMA, table 224.1, uses that don't otherwise require a building permit be principally permitted and not require consultation with city staff.
12-inch tree. What's that? Oh, the 24 12-inch tree.
Oh yeah, I think I was like, and that because we're just making a recommendation that the council consider allowing for tree removal up to 24 inches instead of 12 inches in diameter at breast height.
Do you get that okay? Okay. I will second the motion. And I do think we have a little bit more discussion to do.
I just wanted to clarify for that motion that the 10 or 20 foot from the break-in slope, the intention of the commission would be to not only allow it, but to reduce the permitting burden to allow for a minor permit. Is that what your motion was intended to state?
I was envisioning more of a principally permitted, not like status quo if within 10 or 20 feet of the slope break.
Okay. I'm fine with that too.
Yeah, I had it. Doesn't require any additional permitting. Okay.
Additional discussion? I'm not 100% sure how this vote is going to go, but I do want to say to the group in the room that should this go to the council, as I spoke to a little earlier, they have a different purpose. They are elected, and that's where the policy gets made. So I think it's likely that we're going to make this recommendation, and I want to say thank you for showing up tonight. And would encourage you to do that again and make your views heard when and if this does go to the city council. All right, we ready to take a vote? Let's do a roll call.
Commissioner Freitas?
Yes.
Commissioner Lazar?
Yes.
Commissioner Benson?
No.
And Commissioner Kraft?
Yes.
Thank you. That motion carries.
All right. Thank you again for coming. We can have our actual chair back up here for the last item or two.
Good job, Commissioner Kraft.
That was maybe the toughest one.
Thanks everybody for coming. If you guys could go in the hallway, that would be helpful because we have just one more item on the agenda. If you want to talk, if you guys could go in the hallway, that would be helpful.
Oh, you locked yourself out? I did.
You have to move it forward, right? I think you guys did a great job working through it. Okay, great work. Thank you. And thank you for addressing Mr. Benino. Appreciate you. So it looks like we're moving out of our public hearing and into commissioners' reports and communications. And we have an appointment of a special committee to discuss the commercial fishing industry. Did I do that?
Yeah, I put that on because Commissioner Kraft asked for it.
Oh,
so
yes.
Commissioner Kraft, you can go ahead.
So we had the waterfront plan in front of us the last meeting or so, and I do have a role with the commercial fishing industry, and there is interest both in among some of the kind of newfangled folks like Ashley Vellis, who has started that kind of dockside farmers market approach, to old school commercial fishermen in talking about, you know, what their place is and will and should be in the city of Eureka. There's about 60 boats still that try to make a go of it. And actually, Ashley, with the launch of her new venture, is profiling some of those captains and crews. It's kind of cool stuff. In any case, from that group, I was hearing, would you all, the you all being the Planning Commission, give us appoint a group to look into this and potentially make some recommendations to the wider commission, potentially to the council. And so I did request that we at least kick that around. And as I was leaving, after we had talked about that, I believe it was 2 meetings ago, Commissioner Benson, who was a commercial fisherman in Alaska for a number of years before coming here, said he would be interested in serving as well. So we have, if Michael Benson is still on board, then there's 2 of us who are willing to volunteer, but it is an appointment made, that would be made by the chair. And so I think there's 2 of us with our hands up, but the commission, that body does not have to be appointed, and it doesn't have to be the 2 of us if it is. But I'd be willing to put some work into that, and I think Commissioner Benson is as well. We would probably put a light touch on staff. I think Director Kenyon said that she thought assistant director, associate director, deputy director, damn it, Castellano could help.
Yeah, I mentioned that at the end of last meeting, but then I was thinking about this more, and I was wondering if, I listened back to what you said, and it was like how the city can benefit the commercial fishing industry, and then I was wondering, is this not broader than land use regulation, and maybe is more we should also rope in the Economic Development Commission?
It's a good thought.
Which I haven't asked our economic development director yet about, so I apologize, Swan. But it just seems like if it's a larger discussion and not just about zoning.
I like that. And actually, Kelly Martin and I met originally as serving on the Economic Development Commission. We were 2 of the original commissioners, so I have a fond spot in my heart for that group. I like that, and I think we could probably appoint the commission with the suggestion that we tap somebody from economic development as well. And then obviously we'd want current industry input.
I have just a quick question. Would the intent be to modify code, or would it be other types of recommendations?
I think it could. I think it could have something of a everything on the pizza quality to it, but the core thing really gets down, really does go back to land use and coastal dependent industry. And I think it kind of depends on what you think happens with port development and offshore wind. But most people think we probably have more land around Humboldt Bay than we need that is coastal dependent industrial zoned, and there are higher and better uses that could be done. However, a number of the real jewels of that are in the city of Eureka, and so it would go to, what is down there on the dockside. So the core of it is land use, but there may be things like when I was at the Small Business Development Center, we helped come up with some flags that had crabs and fish on them as a way to make Coast Guard Plaza a little funner, that kind of thing. I wouldn't be surprised if those sorts of things were to come out of it, but the core of it really has to do with CDI.
Yeah, I guess I'm just asking because, the LCP is underway, and I would just want to make sure the timelines dovetailed, if there were things that would go into that document before it went to the Coastal Commission.
And that is kind of a side discussion that Director Kenyon and I had, that this wasn't really as much a waterfront plan thing as it was the coastal plan update.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Did I say that accurately?
I would never stifle your enthusiasm about something like this. I think it's a great idea. And certainly it was clear that even just getting the small project Ashley has off the ground was really difficult. And part of that had to do with zoning and permitting. So if that is where you want to spend some time, I say go for it. I think it's a great idea to include economic development and be clear about what the staff time would be required to.
Right. I don't want to promise staff time right now just because of our capacity, but I also don't want to stifle your enthusiasm. If you guys want to form a subcommittee, I cannot promise staff time. I will look into it. But that couldn't stop you from doing it. And
just send you stuff and dare you not to reply.
You're great at that. And then you could present as a subcommittee to the city council,
That's all good. I sort of spoke for you there, Commissioner Benson. Are you still aboard? And do you have any additional or other thoughts?
I mean, I guess have similar thoughts of like, what is the purpose? What is the purpose of us forming this? Is it to help the fishermen, or to create more rules and regulations for them?
It would be to support the fishermen. This would not be a thing in search of rules.
How do you intend to support them by forming this committee?
Well, I'm actually responding to requests from fishermen who would like to have this happen. So yeah. I think it starts by listening.
100%. I know that. I mean, I commercial fished in Alaska for eight years, dungy fish through Southeast Alaska. And along with, I don't know exactly how it works here. I never really got into it down here, but up there, it just seemed like every year and passing year, there's more rules and regulations, and the fishermen weren't really heard, and rules were being passed without really being on the boats, experiencing the fishing, experiencing exactly what's going on. And I thought about getting in the fishing game back then, just because I didn't like what I saw. And it's just, so if this committee is formed in order to aid the fishermen, because a lot of times things get passed and they don't band together and form alliances and form a committee themselves to fight, maybe some rules that are just basically completely not feasible. So if that's our intent, I'm more than on board.
I would say that is our intent. Okay. And I went to Fort Bragg and back with two different sets of commercial fishermen earlier this month, and I could write a book now on why Californians can't shrimp. Yep. So and Alaska looks like Singapore compared to California when it comes to regulations. Some of that's good, but it certainly limits what the people with the boats can do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you can be the conscience of this that keeps us pointed at that star.
So appointed.
And I just say, I like Dilo and I think Director Kenyon was like, yeah, we got an LCP amendment coming up, and it'd be great to have a better grasp of how the policies in that can support the fishing industry and not assume that they support the fishing industry, but actually be right in line with what those types of land uses need. You know?
And I know City Manager Slattery has already been trying to talk to some people to get them involved. So I'll talk to some fisherwomen. What's the gender
Fisheries persons.
Every commercial fisher woman I've met wants to be called a fisherman.
Okay, so
for what that's worth.
he's working on getting some people interested in participating and in discussing the.
Okay.
So I'll circle back with him and you and Michael Benson on an email.
Beautiful. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And then you'll just advise when you'd like to get back onto the agenda.
Correct, and we'll use the LCP update as a part of how we schedule. And if you don't mind, if we're done with that item, I have one 30-second report I'd like to give on something completely different.
Wait, before we end, the first Humboldt Dockside Market is June 7th, 9 to 1 at Mattakit Plaza.
The day after the first Friday night market. Exciting weekend.
Yeah, there we go.
Of direct-to-consumer opportunities for everybody.
I when I can, I sit in on a Wednesday call that is Greg Foster from REDEC, the Redwood Region Economic Development Commission, hosts. They call it the CERC call. It came up early in the COVID stuff, and they found good traction in sharing resources and communications and stuff. Recently, the funding situation coming both out of Washington, D.C. and the state has been an issue, and I thought that this group should know that it's going to have a real effect on affordable housing and homeless services. And I'm the person who usually says we need housing at all levels, but I would bet pension money that we are going to see a worse situation on the streets due to people being turned out of shelters that just have to downsize in ways and other supportive services. So given that housing at all levels is an interest of this commission, I wanted to pass that piece along.
Thank you for the feedback. The CERC group is great and anyone can tune in. So those meetings are every Wednesday. Anything further? We can move into director's reports and communications.
Do you want to introduce our last new planning person?
Thank you. We have our last new hire, Chris Lohefner. We snagged him from the county. Sorry, Commissioner Lazar. But he's been with us for about 2 weeks, and we're really happy. We're staffed up, but everyone is fairly new here, so I have my work cut out for me, training 3 new assistant planners and a senior planner.
Well, they have great mentors, and I'm sure you'll do great. All right, good work, everybody. That is the end of the meeting.